Chapter 944. In fact, Bucky felt that his cooking skills had improved a lot recently, especially when it came to frying meat. Most of the time, the meat he bought from Miss Maid was raw. Although he couldn't stop eating raw meat, Bucky, who was used to enjoyment, thought about it. Why not make his experience better? Although Miss Maid would leave, didn't he have the club pad at hand? He could buy whatever he wanted, but he just had to pay more for delivery. Bucky, who gradually became financially strong, didn't feel real heartache. On the contrary, through this mobile terminal, he could avoid too much contact with Miss Maid. Bucky even felt relieved. At this moment, Bucky was in a very good mood. After Miss Maid left, he went directly into his private kitchen, turned on the stove, and then put a piece of cut meat into the pan. While humming a tune, he began to cook this unusually delicious dish. Sprinkling salt. After sprinkling some salt on the meat in a particularly showy manner, Bucky suddenly twisted his waist and raised his hand. The steaks on the frying pan were suddenly thrown into the air, flipped over, and fell down again. He continued to sprinkle salt in a showy posture. But at this moment the phone next to him rang, but Bucky didn't move. He was still focused on cooking his delicious food. Because one of the beautiful girls who had been waiting in the kitchen came out at this moment, put the phone next to Bucky's ear, and considerately put it next to his ear. "Oh, Besson, what's the matter?" Bucky asked casually. Bucky liked this Mr. Besson more and more. Of course, he liked Mr. Besson's enchanting wife even more. Although there were more and more people who were willing to devote themselves to him recently, Bucky even felt that he was too busy, but he still occasionally had a friendly match with Mr. Besson's wife. "Meet someone?" Bucky was stunned and then said, "Oh, I remember, I promised. Have they arrived? Well, let them wait for a while. I'll come over later." After that, Bucky continued to fry the steak while thinking about something. The person who came to visit this time was called Saint Fran. He seemed to be a double doctorate holder who came back from abroad and had some financial resources. According to Besson, Dr. Saint Fran seemed to want to participate in this year's presidential election and had been in private contact with the leaders of many parties, but he hadn't decided which party he would run for the election. With the secret help of Mr. Offey, a national dignitary, Bucky's religion had developed rapidly. If the future president, Bucky laughed happily. He felt that he had reached the pinnacle of his life. "Girls, get ready. Let's go meet the guest." Bucky put out the fire and opened his hand. Two beautiful girls around him immediately untied his apron, and the third girl carefully put the fried steak on the plate. However, Bucky was in a good mood, as if he had eaten an expired French snail, even though his favorite magical meat was placed in front of him. With a white scarf around his neck, Bucky, who was sitting at the table, opened his hands. The maids served him a knife and fork and untied half of the mask on his face to make it easier for him to eat. However, when the knife had just cut a small piece, Mr. Besson had already brought today's guest to Bucky. "Sorry, I was busy just now." Although he was now a messenger of God, Bucky would still be humble to strangers who hadn't joined the church yet. "It's okay. I'm sorry to disturb you. I didn't know you were eating. In fact, I can continue to wait." The same polite voice, but this voice made Bucky feel like a poisonous snake was crawling on his body. Bucky slowly turned his head and looked at the guy who was led in by Besson. The so-called Dr. Saint Fran. Wasn't this the brother Ming who played with women and went to jail with him back then? "Hello, Mr. Oracle." Saint Fran looked at the messenger of God in front of him, and then quickly put his hand on his chest and bowed slightly. "It's an honor to meet you." He didn't seem to be Bucky. There was a big difference in body shape. This God's messenger gave him the feeling that he was strong. Last time, when he reunited with his prison buddies at the Opera House, Bucky was obviously pudgy and had been hollowed out by alcohol. After this half-bow, Saint Fran didn't raise his head again. This was some etiquette that Mr. Besson taught him when he came in. He said that the dignity of the messenger of God should not be seen by mortals. Without the permission of the messenger of God, no one was allowed to look directly at him. Saint Fran did as he was told, and so did Cucini, who came in with him and was carefully dressed up. At this moment, Bucky was shouting F***ck. When he saw his old buddy again, he really had an impulse to kick his crotch. At that time, when he escaped from the opera house, he planned to go back to his base camp. Who knew that there was an internal strife in his base camp, and he was directly KO'd. If he hadn't been hiding a secret, the contract between him and Lucifer, the Queen of Hell, he was afraid that he would have died. And all this was because of Brother Ming, the traitor. Messenger? Messengers? Mr. Besson suddenly called out softly beside Buggy. Bucky came back to his senses and heard Mr. Besson whispering, "Messenger, Mr. Saint Fran came here with sincerity. What do you think?" "Yes, I see." Bucky nodded. Mr. Besson stood up and cleared his throat. "Mr. Saint Fran, now please raise your head. The messenger has allowed you to continue to see him." "Thank you very much." Saint Fran raised his head with a smile at this moment. But the messenger of God did not continue to look at him. Instead, he began to eat his steak slowly, as if he didn't care about Bucky at all. Saint Fran didn't mind. He was never short of patience. Otherwise, he would not hide in prison and study several different majors at the same time to enrich himself. Saint Fran stood aside quietly, and his respectful appearance was almost comparable to Mr. Besson's. "I heard from Besson that you have asked to see me several times." Bucky had already eaten half of his steak. He suddenly stopped and asked, "Why do you want to see me?" "I want to see the power of a miracle." Saint Fran was very straightforward. He made his intention clear. "The power of a miracle?" Bucky put down his knife and fork at this time. The maid beside him quickly brought a new napkin and wiped his lips for him. He then said indifferently, "I heard from Besson that you are a doctor with a double degree. You are a highly knowledgeable person. Why, don't you believe in science?" "I believe in science, and I also believe in miracles," Saint Fran replied calmly, "because I believe that miracles are also a kind of science. A subject that we humans have not been able to analyze so far. But everything must have its meaning, so instead of saying why we believe in miracles, it's better to say why we don't believe in miracles." Very interesting answer. Bucky smiled slightly. What the hell is this guy talking about? Why does he sound so awkward? "Thank you for your appreciation." Saint Fran smiled modestly. This even made Bucky wonder if this guy was really the Brother Ming he knew, or was he actually Brother Ming's twin brother? No, the backbone of the Imperial headquarters knew each other very well. If Brother Ming had a twin brother, he would have heard about it. "Well, you want to see a miracle. In fact, it's not impossible." Bucky stood up at this moment. The maids untied the napkin from his collar. At this time, Saint Fran suddenly looked at Bucky's neck. There was a small pendant tied with a black rope. "This is the key to start the nuclear warhead, and it's on me." He instantly recalled the scene when Roger was trying to win him and Moria over at the opera house, showing the secret key unscrupulously. At this moment, Saint Frank's pupils suddenly shrank. Why is he here? No, this person is definitely Bucky. Even if he isn't, he must have a close relationship with Bucky, and he knows that I'm here. But why does the messenger of God carry the key with him, and he doesn't hide it at all, as if he is not afraid of others knowing it? No, it's not that he's not afraid of others knowing it, but I'm afraid that even he himself doesn't know it. Is there anything on me? Bucky felt that Brother Ming. Saint Fran seemed to be a bit strange. Saint Fran quickly smiled and said, "No, I'm just a little surprised. Because I originally thought that the messenger of God might be a weak old man, but now I really didn't expect you to be so strong." "Really?" Bucky smiled proudly, and at the same time, he sucked in his stomach and puffed out his chest. "Many people say the same about me." Just now, the messenger said that it's not impossible to let me see the real miracle. Saint Fran took the opportunity to take 2 steps forward. Excuse me, but he was quickly stopped by Bucky's maids. I'm sorry, I was too excited. If I offended you, please forgive me. Saint Fran stepped back to his original position, apologetically. It's indeed the key. It's exactly the same. I didn't see it wrong. Saint Fran thought secretly. If you want to see it, then show me your piety. At this moment, Buggy suddenly said in a deep voice, The glory of my Lord will only shine on those believers who praise and love him day and night. Saint Fran was not too surprised by this answer, because in his view, the church itself was a crazy money-grubber. It was just that he had never been able to figure out how the followers of this church, which even happened to have a clear vision, were willing to donate so much. But Mr. Besson had a different reaction, because he knew that messengers basically came up to bless those who wanted to join the church, so that they could directly experience the power of God. Of course, Saint Fran smiled at this time, but today's preparation is not enough. How about this? Messenger, in order to show my respect to you, I'm going to hold a banquet in my home. I'll definitely show you my piety. Banquet? Bucky asked curiously. What kind of banquet? Saint Fran looked at Cucini beside him. It's my daughter's birthday banquet. She'll be 20 years old in 2 days. Oh, I'm thinking that if my daughter can see the greatness of a miracle on her birthday, then she will be happy all her life. I hope you can grant my little wish. Hearing Saint Fran's words, Bucky carefully looked at the girl next to him. Almost at the first glance, Bucky was attracted by Cucini's beauty. She was enchanting and gentle, like a white rose with thorns. Obviously, she had carefully dressed up, and her eyes were neither close nor distant, which could arouse a man's curiosity. Is this your daughter? Bucky asked slowly. He remembered that although this guy had many women, he had always been a celibate, because Brother Ming had once said that descendants were sometimes stumbling blocks on the road. Her name is Cucini, my adopted daughter, Mr. Messenger. Saint Fran smiled. Bucky nodded, and at the same time, he was thinking about whether to attend this banquet or not. Because he was very clear about the nature of Brother Ming, who had incarnated as Dr. Saint Fran, this guy's banquets were always bad. However, for so many years, this guy had always been arrogant in front of him, and he had never seen such a docile Brother Ming. At this moment, Bucky felt as if he had eaten ice cream in July. His body and mind were refreshed. Besides, he still had the club pad in his hand. At worst, he could buy a few life-saving items. Even if it was on the general product list, there were still many treasures worth buying. So, it seemed that he didn't need to be afraid at all. Mr. Messenger, what do you think? Saint Fran asked elegantly. Bucky cleared his throat and said, Very well, your invitation to me, Mr. Saint Fran. But I can't promise you now. Of course, I'd be happy to bless this beautiful Miss Cucini, but I'm too busy with the secular affairs. How about this? If I can go there, I'll let Besson contact you at once. That's great. Saint Fran nodded gratefully. After leaving the luxurious manor and getting into the car, Saint Fran's smile faded away, and then he untied his collar. Cucini said, This is the so-called messenger of God. He doesn't seem to have much ability, and he's very greedy. I can smell his vulgarity from far away. Saint Fran said indifferently, Did you see those so-called believers in the manor along the way? Cucini nodded. This messenger is not that simple. Saint Fran shook his head. Otherwise, the believers in the manor wouldn't be like that. It's as if they were ready to die for their God. Cucini was silent. Saint Fran suddenly said, If he comes to the banquet 2 days later, help me take something from him. No matter what, you can do it, but you can't let him know. I'm not sure who's behind him, and what he's up to. No matter what? Chapter 945. There was a voice recording on the other end of the phone, which said, The number you have dialed is not in service. Lucifer put down the phone helplessly. This was the only old-fashioned phone in the monastery and the only way to communicate with the outside world. There was no network here. Lucifer almost lost the means to communicate with Charlotte and the other demons. The phone he had just called was actually the private phone of the Blazing Hot Lips bar. But since this phone no longer existed, it meant that the Blazing Hot Lips bar no longer existed, or that Charlotte had to leave due to other important matters. It was even possible that Charlotte was involved in some kind of danger. With this thought in mind, Lucifer's originally gloomy mood became even more anxious. In fact, there was another way to communicate with the outside world, and that was to walk out. A long time had passed, and the mountain roads had been cleared by the local government. But for Lucifer, this was the most difficult way. Because of Gabriel, Lucifer could not be too far away from the two nuns in the monastery. Gabriel had even implanted the method to control the shackles in the two nuns' minds and gave them God's revelation. So when Gabriel left and the two nuns woke up, Lucifer felt that there was nothing left to live for. Are you really the Queen of Hell? The young nun, Charlotte, was in disbelief. She even pinched Lucifer's face out of curiosity. Holy Mother Mary, you actually brought this legendary sinful fallen angel here. Is this a test for me? As for the old nun, she knelt down in front of the statue of the Virgin Mary and kept praying. But the two nuns soon accepted this matter because they had received God's revelation at the same time. Among the believers of the Lord Jehovah, there had always been a rumor that the Lord would give the devout believers God's revelation. Receiving God's revelation and carrying out the Lord's will were the most important things in the eyes of some believers. Thinking until here, Lucifer sighed and left the room where the phone was placed. Next, Lucifer needed to be careful and cross the backyard because Shalty was in the yard asking for washing clothes. After spending a lot of energy to successfully avoid Charlotte's senses, Lucifer also had to carefully walk through a long corridor because she would pass by the room where Sister Moni was reading. The morning star was no longer shining. Instead, it had become a dust star that rolled on the ground. As for why Lucifer had to be so careful, it was because Sister Moni had assigned her a task today, which was to wipe the floor of the small hall. Sister Moni said it was an act of atonement. She also said that the cleaning of the small hall's floor would be happily awarded to Lucifer. She also said that if she couldn't clean it before sunset, there would be no fun to eat. Perhaps when Lucifer was still a pitiful child who escaped from a cruel adult, they weren't willing to treat her like this. But now that they had received God's revelation, especially Sister Moni, their attitude towards Lucifer had become a little more subtle. Despite having the shackles in her hands that could punish and restrain Lucifer, Sister Moni would always avoid Lucifer's gaze and continue to recite scriptures from the Bible. In short, the feeling of living under someone else's roof reminded Lucifer of the time when she led the angels to rebel and fall into hell. Although the former angels who had just arrived had abandoned their faith, they still had a lot of conflicts with the native devils of hell and were discriminated against by the demons. This is the worst situation. Let's go take a nap, Lucifer sighed. The thought of giving up on herself was born in her mind. No way, Lucifer. However, just as Lucifer was about to move, her collar was grabbed from behind. Lucifer had to pretend that she didn't hear anything and continued to move forward. Then, she was pulled back by someone in an instant, Charlene. Charlene rolled up her sleeves and stared at Lucifer with her arms crossed. Don't be lazy, or else Sister Moni will punish you with no dinner tonight. Shut up, Lucifer, your body can't take it if you don't eat dinner. Charlene widened her eyes and bent down. Shut up, you're worse than an ordinary child now. If you don't eat, you might starve to death. Charlene grabbed Lucifer's shoulder and taught her seriously, do you know? A good child has to do his job. Shut up. The Queen of Hell will actually starve to death. Lucifer, are you listening again? Do you know that it's impolite not to listen to others? Or is there something you're dissatisfied with? If so, you can tell me. How will I know if you don't tell me? We have to reflect on ourselves. You're distracted again, Lucifer. Didn't I say that when you listen to others you have to pay attention and look into their eyes? This is the most basic etiquette. Stop talking. Shut up. You're a sow that I didn't even want to play with in the past. What right do you have to preach in front of me? Huh? Chatter, 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 chatter like a fly. Lucifer, who was on the verge of collapse, had a fierce expression on her face. Do you know who I am? I'm one of the 7 imperial pillars that rule hell, the arrogant empress, Lucifer. Sow. Shasharasha. Charlene suddenly closed her eyes and quickly spat out a series of syllables. When Lucifer heard the syllables, her body instantly became abnormally heavy. She blinked her eyes and sat down on the ground, like a duck sitting down. Moreover, her hands and neck were shackled by a huge shackle. This was the ability that Gabriel had given to the 2 nuns, who were ordinary people, the ability to take care of this hell empress. Charlene could summon the shackles and instantly make herself sit down. As for the old nun, she could summon the chains that linked the shackles and make herself stay. The 2 nuns even called this ability command incantation. At this moment, Lucifer couldn't stand up. Her body seemed to have been given some kind of command. Like a sinner, she could only raise her head to look at the young nun. You can't. Lucifer, you're not allowed to say such vulgar words next time. You have to be a good child, okay? There was still a trace of anger on Charlene's face, but she still patiently continued her preaching. The great abyss will of hell, save me, Lucifer exhaled as if she had spat out her soul. Her face was haggard, and then, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. That was a joke. As the dignified Hell Empress, even if her body died, her soul could be resurrected in the arrogance God's treasure in the abyss. It was just that, if it wasn't a desperate situation, Lucifer wasn't willing to let her soul return to the abyss. The next time she was reborn, perhaps the current personality of Lucifer would disappear. But just as Charlene was talking enthusiastically, the sound of a cup breaking was suddenly heard. It came from the room where the old nun was reading. Charlene couldn't care less about Lucifer's preaching anymore. She lifted the nun's skirt and quickly ran to the room. Thanks to this, Lucifer was finally able to stand up, but the shackles on her neck had not disappeared yet. She sighed and slowly followed after him. When Lucifer arrived at the door of the room, she saw Charlene holding the old nun who had fallen to the ground. Beside her was a broken cup and splashed water. At this moment, the old nun's eyes were closed and she had a painful expression. She reached out and grabbed the clothes on her chest. Lucifer frowned and slowly walked over. What happened to her? It should be her old illness. Charlene hurriedly said, a few years ago, the old nun suddenly started to have angina from time to time. But after seeing the doctor and taking medicine, she hasn't had any relapses in the past year. Oh, is that so? No wonder she looks like she's dying. Lucifer suddenly squinted his eyes. As a shackled Lucifer, he couldn't take the initiative to harm the old and young nuns who possessed the command curse. But if it was a normal death, I remember now, the old nun has finished her medicine for this month. Charlene said worriedly. I should be the one to get the medicine, but the mountain path was blocked and I couldn't send it over. I'm afraid the old nun has stopped for a few days. Lucifer sneered. She probably felt that since she hasn't had any relapses for a year, it doesn't matter whether she takes medicine or not. I'm afraid the medicine she usually takes is too much for her to bear, right? How did you know? Charlene was stunned. This kind of thing, as long as you have a brain, you can figure it out, so? Lucifer shrugged. This old woman won't be able to live past tonight. Go and prepare to bury her. Otherwise, if there's a corpse stench, I'm fine with it, but as for you, I'm afraid you won't be able to get used to it. I can't do it. Charlene stood up with red eyes. I can't do it. As she said that, she quickly helped the old nun up and walked step by step towards the garage where the motorcycles were placed. It was obviously very difficult for Charlene to support a completely immobile person, so she could only carry her on her back. Perhaps because she was too worried about the old nun, the shackles that bound Lucifer had disappeared. Lucifer was happy and comfortable, with a faint smile on his face. He followed behind Charlene. It was really moving, the young girl's struggle and hardship, and the grief and fear she felt when her family left her, even though she had lost all her strength and couldn't extract anything from this despair for the time being. Just a single glance was enough to make one's heart feel happy. This might be the happiest day Lucifer had ever been since he came to the monastery. Give up, you can't help her. If everything goes well, I'm afraid it will take more than an hour to get out of here, right? With her current condition, she won't be able to endure it. Charlene clenched her teeth. Her eyes were slightly red and moist. Lucifer's words of despair were like a merciless whip. Hey, even if she dies, it doesn't matter to you, right? You might be able to inherit this monastery directly. Although it's very shabby, it will belong to you in the future. Lucifer quickly walked in front of Charlene, opened his hands, and then spun his body. Think about it, no one will control you anymore. You can do whatever you want. You don't have to recite those boring and disgusting hymns every day. How delightful it is. Ah, freedom, she is in front of you. Charlene still didn't say a word, and just walked forward quickly. Do you feel guilty? Are you reluctant? Or are you hypocritical? At this time, Lucifer said in a playful tone, Did you forget those dirty books you secretly hid under the bed? Or did you forget what you did to yourself at night? I saw it. Charlene's pupils suddenly shrank. It was like the whisper of a demon. No, she was the queen of hell. At this moment, Lucifer jumped on the low railing of the corridor and chuckled in Charlene's ear. Do you need me to repeat it? Your hands slowly need your body, and your body trembling. You want to make a sound, but you are afraid of being heard by the nanny in the next room. You are afraid, but you show a satisfied and infatuated look because of your morality. I saw it all, oh, all of it. The voice was soft, just by the ear. Lucifer suddenly licked Charlene's ear. You are fantasizing about me. You pervert. You don't want the nanny to know these things, right? You don't want to disappoint her, right? But all the secrets in the world can't be hidden. Only the dead can't know. Do you understand? Charlene's body suddenly trembled, as if all the strength in her body was drained. Yes, that's it. Just stop. Lucifer's voice was softer at this time. Don't worry, just treat it as a natural death. Anyway, she's already at this age. Although it's a bit annoying, I have to admit that with the nanny's piety, she will definitely enter the kingdom of heaven after death. That guy will probably like the nanny's soul very much, right? What reason do you have to stop her from entering the kingdom of heaven? Slap. A crisp sound of a slap. At this moment, Charlene lowered her head, but her hand had already raised. The moment she raised her hand, she slapped Lucifer's cheek, making a very crisp sound. Lucifer was a little stunned, subconsciously covering his cheek. Charlene raised her head at this time, with tears in her eyes. She looked at Lucifer with disappointment, saying in a hoarse voice, You have never been loved by anyone. With that, Charlene ignored Lucifer, carrying the nanny, and quickly walked towards the garage. Lucifer continued to cover her face. After a while, she looked up at the sky behind her and blinked. Love and what not. I don't need it. Chapter 946. The clinic in the village was a bit shabby, but the doctor had promised to do his best to save the old woman. Even so, Shalty still waited outside the door worriedly. Perhaps it was the habit of a believer. Shalty held a cross in her hand and knelt in front of the window at the end of the corridor, praying silently. Lucifer couldn't be too far away from the two nuns. At this time, he could only lean against the wall in boredom and stare at the process of a small spider pouncing on its prey. He thought about what would happen if the old nanny who was performing first aid inside failed. Even though Rufa took the initiative to attack the two nuns, it would be another matter if they died of natural causes. If the old nun who limited the distance wasn't here, then as long as he could avoid Shalty, as he was thinking, the doctor finally came out of the room. At the same time, he removed the mask on his face, revealing a tired expression. Hearing the commotion, Shalty quickly stood up and hurried to the doctor. The doctor sighed and frowned. We finally passed the most dangerous period, but the situation isn't good. Shalty, you should know that the conditions here are really bad. Are you going to send the old woman to the hospital in the city? Can you contact the hospital there and ask for an ambulance? Shalty quickly asked. The doctor said helplessly, Shalty, even if it's a big city hospital, the resources are limited. I've already asked someone to contact the hospital, and several hospitals' ambulances have been dispatched. I'm afraid the earliest would be tonight. But considering the old woman's current situation, I'm afraid it's a bit too late. How can that be? Shalty became anxious. How about this? I'll send the old woman out myself. That's what I meant. The doctor nodded. But if you send her in your car, the road will be too bumpy. How about this? I'll drive her out. If there's an emergency on the road, I might be able to handle it. Thank you, doctor. Thank you, doctor. Shalty thanked the doctor gratefully. You're welcome. The doctor smiled. I grew up in this village and have always been taken care of by the old woman. If she's in trouble, how can I not help? So annoying. Lucifer watched the little bug fall into the spider's mouth, but at the same time, he heard the conversation between the doctor and Shalty clearly. So annoying. Helping each other? A heart of gratitude? You don't care? Lucifer suddenly asked coldly. Shalty and the doctor looked at Lucifer at the same time, revealing a puzzled expression. Lucifer sneered. You're the only doctor here. Once you leave, what will happen to the rest of the patients? Don't you care? Lucifer. Shalty called out his name in dissatisfaction. Lucifer said nonchalantly, I saw it when I first came in. Is there a baby with a high fever? Was it really okay to leave just like that? What baby needs you, doctor? Or is it that compared to this baby, the old nun's life is more important? The doctor frowned. Charty, what's wrong with this child? Shalty was at a loss for words at this moment. She didn't know why. The old lady's life and the baby's comfort, it was as if a scale had suddenly been erected in his heart. Lucifer didn't intend to stop at this time. Instead, he said with interest, Oh yes, it's said that saving lives is a doctor's duty, right? May I ask, in the eyes of doctors, is there a difference in value between life? When you're needed, which one do you intend to save, the old lady or the baby? The doctor's eyes suddenly opened a little. This question had been asked by his tutor in class when he was studying for his medical qualification. Undoubtedly, this was the most difficult question to choose. Obviously, this doctor wasn't a person who chased after fame and fortune, otherwise, he wouldn't be willing to come to this small village to treat patients. But Lucifer's words were far from finished, with a more playful taste. Which one do you intend to give up? The doctor's lips moved and said with a sullen face, I know the child's situation better. Although the high fever is not subsiding, it will be fine after a while. Even if I leave, I can still tell the nurse. Don't worry, she's also a professional. Oh, is that so? That's good. Lucifer nodded. Then according to the agreement, doctor, you can drive. After all, only you have a car to go out. Well, let's not delay. The doctor nodded quickly. He didn't know why, but he seemed to be relieved, but at the same time, he didn't dare to look at the child's eyes. At this time, Lucifer was walking forward with his hands behind his head. But after a few steps, she suddenly turned her head and squinted. I suddenly thought of two things. Doctor, what if something happens to the baby, and the nurse can't deal with it? Will it put the baby in more danger? The doctor's face suddenly became a little ugly. This child. There's one more thing. Lucifer chuckled. What if a more serious patient suddenly comes after you leave? What should you do? What should I say about responsibility? Oh, by the way, one last thing. Do you think doctors should leave their jobs or not? If it's to treat a patient far away. The doctor looked at Charlotte blankly, but he quickly avoided her gaze after taking a glance at her. Charlotte's lips moved, but her fingers holding the corner of her clothes were a little pale. What's wrong with this kid? Which family is he from, so insensible? All of a sudden, Lucifer felt his whole body being lifted up by someone. The clothes behind his back were grabbed. She turned around and saw a muscular, tall, and bearded man glaring at her angrily. Mr. Esam. The doctor called out, "Your child." Mr. Esam shook his head. "The fever hasn't subsided, but I'm not worried because I believe my child can overcome this difficulty. This bit of suffering was just a test for him. If he can't even overcome this test, then it can only be said that he will lack toughness in the future. After all, he was born not long ago. Mr. Esam, your words are a little." The doctor shook his head. Mr. Esam said loudly, "I really don't know what you're worried about. Although there's only one car, there's more than one person who can drive. Doctor, you really shouldn't leave your job, but I can. Let me do it. I'll send Mammy to the hospital in the city." "That's great." The doctor patted his forehead and said, "I remember, Mr. Esam used to be a truck driver. This is a very good solution. Thank you, Mr. Esam." Charlotte gratefully grabbed the uncle's hand. "What are you talking about? I'm still waiting for Mammy to baptize my child." "Haha, how can I let Mammy retire so soon?" Mr. Esam laughed. "I drive very fast." It seemed that the predicament was broken in an instant by this man's words, and a ray of bright sunshine penetrated the heavy atmosphere. Tsk. Lucifer's eyes narrowed, staring at Mr. Esam, who suddenly appeared. It was really annoying, this dazzling brilliance. "I've already contacted the hospital. This is the hospital's address and contact number. After the patient is sent, someone will pick you up immediately." In front of the small clinic, the doctor stood in front of the car that had already started the engine and handed a note to Charlotte. Charlotte helped the unconscious Mammy to sit in the back seat. As for Lucifer, he was arranged to sit in the front passenger seat and was roughly fastened by Mr. Esam. "I'm going, doctor, wait for my good news." Uncle Esam stretched his hand out of the car window and gave a thumbs up. Looking at his car driving away, the doctor didn't know why, but he let out a long sigh. He muttered to himself, "Such a young child actually said such terrible words. What will happen when he grows up?" But babies and old people. If Mr. Esam wasn't here this time, then what was the answer? "You all wait for me here. Don't come in without my permission." In front of a brand-name clothing store, the messenger of God ordered the bodyguards who were responsible for protecting him. After that, Buggy got out of the car, pushed open the revolving door of the clothing store, and walked in. The staff and the customers in the store all felt strange when they saw a guy with a mask walking in. Of course, the luxurious suit on the masked man did not escape the sharp eyes of the staff. "Sir, how can I help you?" A big-breasted staff walked to Buggy at this time and asked with a smile. "Where's the bathroom?" Buggy asked directly. "Over there." The staff was stunned. "He's dressed so well, is he just here to use the bathroom?" However, under the excellent service training, the staff still pointed the way for Buggy. "Thank you. May God bless you," Buggy said in a gentle voice, and then quickly walked toward the bathroom. It was just that when Buggy entered the bathroom, the mask on his face began to melt in an instant, but it did not leave his face. Instead, it melted and formed again. In the end, it became a human face, completely attached to Buggy's face. Buggy glanced at his appearance in the mirror at this time and smiled with satisfaction. It's boring. Although the current life is the life of his dream, it is indeed very boring. Especially after a long time, when he is more idle, he even has to pass the time in a daze. Even when he was in prison, the prison would let him out every day. Living in the manor with respectful believers in front and behind him made Buggy feel that it was a little difficult to find someone to chat with. Changing his face is a very effective means. It was a very right thing to spend a lot of money to buy this mask. At this time, Buggy patted his cheeks and turned into a charming man in his 30s. Then, he took off his mask, hung it on his arm, and walked out directly. He easily left the sight of the bodyguards outside the shop. Buggy did not intend to come out like this for a long time. He did not intend to give up his current life. This was just to come out and enjoy the long-lost taste of solitude. In general, Buggy was actually a cheap guy. Why did he say so? Because at this time, Buggy was walking in a small alley full of eroticism. Although there were many young and beautiful girls in the manor, but after eating so many exquisite snacks, he occasionally wanted to eat that kind of street food. A group of prostitutes around him made all kinds of advances as he walked by. This long-lost taste made Buggy feel like he had returned to the past when he was fighting in the Imperial Capital headquarters. Of course, in such a small alley, in addition to the prostitutes standing on the street, there were naturally two other kinds of money-making things: illegal gambling dens and scum selling drugs. At this time, Buggy's gaze swept across the bodies of the prostitutes lustfully, showing a comfortable expression. I feel like I have replenished a lot of energy. Just as Buggy was thinking about choosing a woman who was still acceptable among so many fireflies to have a long-lost outdoor friendly match in the dark alley and reminisce about the romantic years when he was struggling in the past, he was suddenly attracted by the screams in the forked alley on the side. He saw a few young people who looked like gangsters were punching and kicking a somewhat fat guy at this time. Buggy did not care too much. After all, this kind of thing was very normal in this kind of place. It was probably a dispute between territories. If not, it was some unlucky guy who broke the rules. This industry is really difficult. Buggy sighed, then rubbed his hands, looking like he was in the terminal stage of cheap cancer, and continued to look for prostitute. It was really a waste of the image of this mask at this time. I tell you, my boss is Buggy. If you dare to hit me again, my boss, Buggy, will not let you go. However, at this time, in the forked alley, there was such an angry clamor, and the voice was unexpectedly familiar to Buggy. Hey, where have I heard this voice? Buggy frowned and decided to return. More importantly, the person who was clamoring actually mentioned Boss Buggy. Buggy walked into the forked alley with a sullen face. Several young gangsters did not care at all and just continued to hit people. Friend, isn't it a bit too much? If you kill people, it is also against the rules, right? Buggy said indifferently at this time. Who are you? Are you looking for trouble? A young man with a lot of tattoos stared fiercely at him. Buggy shrugged and then glanced at the fat guy who was beaten to the ground. The guy who shouted, "My boss is Buggy," also raised his head at this time. His eyes were black and his face was swollen, but his original appearance could be recognized. Buggy was stunned. Wasn't this guy the one who helped him escape and was thrown away by him in the end, Cage, the prison van's captain? Chapter 947. He remembered that Captain Cage was supposed to follow him, but when Buggy asked him to go over and meet with his men, a large group of plainclothes suddenly appeared out of nowhere. At that time, Buggy thought that he had no time to care about Cage, so he quickly ran away. After that, a series of things happened. If he hadn't suddenly met him here today, Buggy would have probably completely forgotten about him. Buggy had basically forgotten some of Coach Cage's promises, but he felt very touched when this guy called him, "My boss, Buggy." Get lost, do you want to die? The young man with many tattoos was holding an iron pipe in his hand. He patted his palm and walked in front of Buggy. Oh, are all the guys who come out to mingle now like this? It's a lot worse than before. Buggy sighed at this time. I really don't know how your boss taught you. I'm the boss. The young man sneered. It seems that you're going to pick a fight. Do you know this guy? He stole money from me, so I taught him a lesson. Do you have a problem with that? You've already fought, so let's just forget about it. Buggy said indifferently, friend, give me face. We're all out to mingle, so we'll see each other all the time. Maybe we'll be together in the future. Then I'll make you lower your head to see me." With that, the ferocious young man directly waved the iron pipe in his hand. "Damn it, how dare you show off in front of me?" Unexpectedly, this menacing iron pipe was easily caught by Buggy and then held in his hand. The ferocious young man was stunned, and then tried to pull the weapon back, but found that the iron pipe was motionless after being held by Buggy. "I'm giving you face, so don't blame me," Buggy sneered. "You want to talk about rules with me? When I came out into the world, you guys were still peeking at prostitutes eating meat. Look at you guys." As he spoke, Buggy directly kicked out and directly kicked the young man in the stomach. This kick was very strong, and it directly kicked the young man more than 2 meters away. The young man fell to the ground. He was in so much pain that he foamed at the mouth. Then, he fainted. When the rest of the youths saw this, they immediately surrounded him. However, Bucky directly bent the iron pipe in front of everyone and threw it on the ground. He waved his hand as a sinister smile appeared on his face. "If you're not afraid of death, then come at me." Buggy's words scared these young men so much that their faces turned pale in an instant. Then, someone shouted, and the group of people scattered, turned around, and ran directly into the alley. Useless. Buggy sighed, lamenting that the punks were not as good as they used to be. He walked to Cage and reached out to help him up. "Are you okay? I didn't expect you to be so heavy." "You are." Cage opened his swollen eyes and looked at the guy who helped him in surprise. There was no doubt that he was a well-dressed guy. Furthermore, he was very charming. He was probably someone with a lot of money. Why would such a person not go to those high-class clubs and instead come to this kind of place where people from all walks of life gather? Most importantly, why did he save me? Buggy smiled and said, "Because my boss is also Buggy." Cage was stunned. Then, with a plop, he directly hugged Buggy's thigh and cried, "I finally found the organization! Boss Buggy, I finally found your news." Hey, this guy probably hadn't had a good meal for several days. In the open-air cafeteria of the hospital, Bucky, who was holding a cold drink in his hand, was biting on the straw. He was dumbfounded as he looked at Cage, who was bandaged again and again. "Well, call me again if it's not enough. One more grilled steak, thank you." Cage didn't show any politeness, because on the way here, this guy claimed to be Boss Buggy's savior. According to the conversation on the way here, Buggy finally knew what happened after he was betrayed and Cage was caught. It turned out that the policeman who was hiding that day mistook Cage for Buggy. After that, he flew into a rage and directly threw Cage into the detention center after teaching him a lesson. In the end, Cage applied for a lawyer himself, and after several twists and turns, he was bailed out. Cage's statement to the police was that he had been threatened by Buggy with his life, so he had no choice but to help Buggy escape. After the police investigated Cage's file, they seemed to believe his testimony and finally released him. However, that was the start of Cage's misfortune. First of all, because he drove a prisoner van to help a felon escape, Cage lost his original job. Then, when he was bailed out, he found that his wife had run away with another man, and even took away his younger daughter. When they got married, the name of the property was written in his wife's name. However, the house had been sold, and Cage was directly driven out. Losing his job, losing his house, and even all the savings in the joint account were taken away. Cage instantly became a penniless person, and even owed a large amount of litigation fees. In the end, the financial pressure forced Cage to take a risk and embark on the road of crime. At first, he just hid and robbed the passers-by, but after succeeding a few times, Cage gradually became bolder. Today, he saw a very good prey waiting to be robbed, but he did not expect that the woman he robbed was the woman of a local gangster boss. After that, Cage was directly driven into an alley and beaten up. Cage suddenly opened his fat mouth and asked, "Did Boss Buggy ask you to save me this time?" "Sure enough. I know that Boss Buggy is a person who values friendship and righteousness. He won't abandon me so easily. Well, of course. Our Boss Buggy values friendship and righteousness. This is something the whole world knows. I've only met such a great boss in my life. Buggy always felt that when he said this, he did not feel guilty at all and did not blush at all. He probably practiced it when he fooled believers. How is Boss Buggy now? Is he safe? Cage asked nervously. I saw that many people wanted to catch him that day. He's fine now and very safe. He's living well. You don't have to worry. Buggy replied casually. Well, he finally remembered what he had promised Cage. Then can I go and see Boss Buggy? Cage looked at him with hope. Buggy shook his head. I'm afraid not. Boss Buggy has something important to do now. It's not convenient for him to show up. Well, after this period of time, I'll tell him. That's true. I think Boss Buggy must have been killed by a traitor. He must be planning to take revenge himself. Cage nodded. Unfortunately, I can't help Boss Buggy. If I could be by his side, I would definitely do my best. I didn't expect this guy to be so loyal. Buggy laughed. It's rare for you to be so considerate. I think Boss will be very happy when he knows. Am I right? Cage hurriedly wiped his mouth, then leaned over and said, Let me tell you, bro. Oh, I forgot to ask your name on the way here. What's your name, bro? Me? Bah. Buggy replied subconsciously, then turned around and cleared his throat. You can call me Kiba. So it's Brother Kiba. Cage nodded and said directly, Brother Kiba? Oh no, it's Boss Kiba. Thank you for saving me. From now on, I'll follow you. I've already thought about it. I've already promised Boss Buggy to follow him, and he's also promised me. But since Boss Buggy isn't here, and you're his right-hand man, I think it's the same for me to follow you. Isn't he a talent? Why didn't I see it before? Buggy suddenly quivered, then hurriedly stood up and said, Oh, take your time. I suddenly remembered that there's another important thing I need to do. It's very urgent. I'll pay the bill, don't worry. Don't. Boss Kiba. Unexpectedly, Cage threw himself on the ground and hugged Buggy's thigh at a speed that was completely inconsistent with his bloated body. Boss Kiba, don't leave me alone. If you leave me alone, my life will really be gone. Hey. Buggy tried to pull his leg, but found that he couldn't move it. Poor Boss Buggy, my wife and child ran away with someone else. But I've never regretted it. Cage said with tears and snot, I've never regretted it. I've always felt that my life was dull and tasteless. Until I met Boss Buggy that day. He opened the door to a new world for me. He made me understand that there's such a wonderful thing in this world. I'll never forget what happened that night. Hey. Buggy even used his hands, but he still couldn't untie his leg from Cage's tight grip. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the strange stares and whispers from the diners nearby. Your wife and child ran away with someone else. For Boss Buggy? You opened the door to a new world. Is this your first time going to Night Fugu? And I'll never forget the wonderful thing that happened that night. Didn't you just sleep with a banshee and suck out your essence? Why do you make it sound like I did it? F***ck. Wah. You can't abandon me like this. I'm homeless now. Don't wipe your nose on my leg, bastard. Dad, what are these two uncles doing? Shoo, don't look at them, kid. These two men are so disgusting. Whispers. Enough! Bucky shouted. Not only did his shout stun Cage, but it also startled the customers around him. Damn it, I know. I'll accept you. Hurry up and stand up for me, Buggy said quickly. Now you want to leave with me, don't you think it's shameful enough? Oh. Okay, Boss Kiba. The car swung its tail and reversed into the garage with a very beautiful movement, fully demonstrating Mr. Isam's driving skills. But this was not the time to be amazed, because the old woman's situation was very critical. After getting off the carriage, Mr. Esam hurriedly carried the old woman and rushed in. He had contacted the emergency personnel on the way, and they were already waiting for him. "I'm not going in." Unexpectedly, Lucifer suddenly stopped at this time. Charlotte was not in the mood to argue with Lucifer, she just frowned. "You can't go too far away from us." "I know I can't go." Lucifer shook his head and said indifferently, "As long as this old woman is not, I can't go too far away from her. I just don't like the smell here." "You don't like the smell of medicine?" Charlotte was stunned. Lucifer said with disgust, "There are clerics in the hospital, I can feel it. They are probably ferrying the souls of the dead. I hate the holy light very much, so I'll just stay outside." At this time, Uncle Esam turned around and said, "Charlotte, hurry up, what are you waiting for? Right away." The old woman's condition was more important. Charlotte clenched her teeth and quickly chanted a spell imprinted in her mind. Lucifer frowned. At this moment, her body suddenly became heavy. She struggled to walk to a bench at the side and sat down, gasping for breath. "I'm sorry, but wait for me here," Shalti quickly said, then hurriedly followed Esam inside. Looking at Shalti's disappearing figure, Lucifer tried to lift his hand, but after lifting it a little, his hand drooped down instantly as though it was absorbed by the earth. The Queen of Hell's eyes flashed with a terrifying cold light. "Gabriel, just you wait. Boss Kiba, where are we going? I don't have a place to stay now, you see." After leaving the hospital's cafeteria, Buggy was thinking about how to get rid of Cage, but it seemed not to be an easy thing to do. "Well, I'll go to the bathroom, and then use a mask to change my identity. That's it." "Cage, wait for me here, I'm going to the bathroom," Buggy said quickly. But before Cage could react, Buggy had already walked straight to the bathroom. However, at this time, there was a rush of shouting in the corridor. "Excuse me, please excuse me. Severe case. Please excuse me." The doctor opened the way in front, and behind him were several nurses pushing a mobile bed. It seemed that there was also a strong man and a nun rushing over. Buggy was careless and was directly knocked to the ground. At the same time, the nun who bumped into Buggy also fell to the ground. "Hey! Don't you look where you're going? Don't you know you bumped into my boss?" Cage immediately shouted and quickly helped Buggy up. Buggy frowned as he looked at the nun who had fallen to the ground with him, and frowned. The man also stopped. "Shalti, are you okay?" At this time, because Shalti hit the ground, her veil fell down and her long hair naturally hung down. She subconsciously raised her head. Because she was too worried about the old nurse's condition, her eyes were already red and hazy. Buggy glanced at her, his eyes narrowed slightly, and his heart suddenly beat. I'm sorry. Shalti hurriedly apologized, then got up and then chased up, because the bed had entered the elevator. F***ck, what kind of person is this, a nun? She has no manners at all. Boss Kiba, are you okay? Cage asked while patting the dust on Buggy's clothes. At this time, Buggy bent down to pick up the veil on the ground, took a deep breath, and suddenly said, "Cage, didn't you say you wanted to follow me? I have something for you to do now." "Boss Kiba, what do you want to do?" "Go and find out the name of the young nun, what she likes to eat, where she lives." Buggy slowly turned to look at Cage. "I seem to have fallen in love." Chapter 948. The old nanny's first aid went smoothly. At the same time, Mr. Esam's child's fever had subsided. This was all good news. However, the old nanny had not woken up yet because of the medicine. But Shalti's expression was no longer tense. Apparently, she was relieved. "Shalti, if there's nothing else, I'll go back first." Mr. Esam walked into the ward. "I'll pick up the nanny when she's discharged." "Thank you, Mr. Esam," Shalti said gratefully. Mr. Esam smiled heartily. "It's nothing. By the way, about the cost, if you have any difficulties, you must tell me. I'll go back and think of a way for you." Shalti smiled. "Don't worry about the cost. I've contacted the church here. The cathedral here will pay for the nanny's treatment. That's great. Mr. Esam nodded and said emotionally, "It seems that it's better to have faith." Shalty smiled and said, "If the mutual aid between people disappeared, we would have disappeared a long time ago." "That's true." Mr. Esam nodded. Shalty stood up and put her palm on Mr. Esam's forehead to give him some blessings. Of course, this was not the visible blessing of Bucky, but just a simple ceremony. Or rather, it was a spiritual blessing. Before leaving, Mr. Esam suddenly said, "By the way, the child is still outside. Do you need me to bring her back? I think this child is a bit strange. Do you want me to take care of her for a few days?" Shalty could only say, "The child can't be too far away from me and the nanny. It's okay, I'll go find her later." Mr. Esam did not understand the real meaning of "can't be too far away." He thought that the child would be awkward if she did not see anyone. The child was already awkward enough when they were in the village clinic. "Well, if there's anything else, just call me." Mr. Esam nodded. "I'll be right there." A very good person. Shalty looked at Uncle Esam's back as he left and thought silently. Good people will be rewarded. The old nanny had always said so. Smoking was not allowed in the hospital, but obviously, Mr. Esam was a smoker. Therefore, he left the lobby and came to the parking lot outside. Mr. Esam lit a cigarette and started smoking. Exhaling a long cloud of smoke, Mr. Esam looked at the sky. It should be very late by the time he returned to the village. The child's condition had improved, and the old nanny had returned. Mr. Esam suddenly felt extremely satisfied. He suddenly wanted to eat his wife's soup. He walked towards the parking lot, but after a few steps, he saw Lucifer sitting on a bench in the parking lot. This child seemed to have been sitting there motionless since the beginning. Mr. Esam frowned and walked towards the child subconsciously. When he heard the child's words in the village clinic, he always felt that it was not something a little girl could say. It was so cold and forced people into a desperate situation. But suddenly, the sitting Lucifer slowly raised his head. The small head was half raised, and his eyes could just be seen. There was also a strange smile on his face. Mr. Esam was suddenly startled and had a creepy feeling. The child's smile was supposed to be innocent, but on this child it was so scary. What's wrong with this child? He couldn't help but shudder. His hand trembled, and the cigarette between his fingers accidentally fell to the ground. Mr. Esam came back to his senses and secretly thought that he was actually frightened by such a small child. Mr. Esam shook his head and laughed at himself. Then he bent down and wanted to pick up the cigarette butt. But at this moment, he only felt a sharp pain behind his waist. After that, there was another. The pain of being torn twice in a row. Mr. Esam's pupils opened in an instant, and he screamed, but his body was strong. Even if he was attacked, he could barely hold on. Mr. Esam waved his hand and swept behind him. He seemed to have swept something. He painfully covered the back of his waist and stood up unsteadily. It was obvious that someone had stabbed him with a knife. Moreover, it was 2 knives. At this moment, blood was gushing out of the wound. At this moment, Mr. Esam finally saw who had attacked him. A man with a distorted, haggard face full of despair, fear and panic, wearing a patient's clothes. He was about 25 or 26 years old. And in his hand, he was holding a knife. There was obviously bright red blood on the blade. "What do you want to do? Why did you attack me?" Mr. Esam roared angrily at the man. The pain made him kneel on the ground, and cold sweat broke out. "I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I don't want to die." However, the young man seemed to not hear Mr. Esam's scolding. At this time, his body was trembling, and he lowered his head and muttered to himself, "I don't want to die. I'm so young, why? You." Mr. Esam frowned in pain. At this time, he needed help. He needed to stop the bleeding, and at the same time, He needed someone to stop this mentally ill man. "Who is it? Come and help! Help!" Puff! Suddenly, the man lowered his head, held the knife with both hands, and rushed toward Mr. Esam again. This time, he directly stabbed Mr. Esam's abdomen. Mr. Esam's eyes widened and widened and widened. The man pulled out the knife, stabbed it in again, and pulled it out again. His face was full of despair and violence. "Why me? Why me? Why am I infected with AIDS? Why? I don't want to die. All of you go to hell. Ha ha. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Die 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 die." He shed tears and laughed. "Die die die die." Mr. Esam finally fell in a pool of blood. At this moment, someone screamed in the parking lot, and then several people rushed over and pressed the crazy man to the ground. Esam now only felt that his body was very cold, and his vision was a little blurred. He seemed to see Charlotte, who had just walked out of the parking lot entrance. Shalty covered her mouth and widened her eyes. Then, she quickly ran towards him. He subconsciously looked at the child sitting on the bench. He found that the child was still showing him a strange smile. Suddenly, Mr. Esam understood what this smile meant. Despair. "Mr. Esam! Mr. Esam! Sir! Help! Who is it? Who is it? Help!" Charlotte rushed over, holding Mr. Esam, who was covered in blood, and cried bitterly. Esam's lips moved at this time, as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he couldn't say a word and directly fainted. The sky had turned completely dark and the parking lot was cool. Lucifer was still sitting there alone, looking up at the stars in the sky. He appeared to be in a good mood. Suddenly, Charlotte slowly walked over. Her right hand gripped her left elbow tightly as she came to stand before Lucifer. Charlotte's face was pale. The doctor said that Mr. Esam's heart was stabbed many times, treatment was ineffective. "Oh, is that so?" Lucifer said coolly. "What a pity. He is clearly such a good person. He has an upright and kind heart. What a pity, what a pity." However, the moment when that light disappeared before my eyes, it was truly delightful. Charlotte looked at Lucifer, her eyes never blinking. She said in a low voice, "I heard that the murderer is an AIDS patient. He had been receiving treatment for a long time, but it was ineffective. In the end, he went insane and decided to take revenge on society. Isn't this a very common thing? It is not a big deal." Lucifer shrugged. "It's you, right?" Charlotte suddenly asked. Lucifer did not say anything. He simply raised his head to look at Charlotte. At that moment, it was as though a switch had been turned on for Charlotte. She abruptly rushed forward and grabbed Lucifer's collar with both hands. She screamed, "It's you, right? It's you, right? It's your fault, right? It's your fault. It's you." The tight collar caused the skin on Lucifer's neck to shrink. However, he continued to look at Charlotte with an expressionless face. He said coldly, "I said, did you see it with your own eyes? It's you. Back in the village clinic, your words nearly caused the doctor to break down. It's you. You demon." "I am a demon to begin with," Lucifer sneered. "I have always been one. Didn't you already know that? Also, answer me. Did you see what I did with your own eyes? Other than you." Charlotte screamed out in pain. "Other than me," Lucifer said coolly. "True, other than me. Well then, just treat me as the real murderer. Anyway, aren't humans used to setting up a target for themselves and then releasing all their sadness, pain, and anger? It just so happens that this target is me, a demon. It's too suitable, right? But..." Lucifer suddenly narrowed his eyes and said jokingly, "Your God, did he allow you to do this? Take out your anger on me." Shalty suddenly raised her hand. Lucifer said indifferently, "Oh, there's violence, right?" Charlotte's body suddenly trembled. Her arm froze and trembled. She bit her lips and looked at Lucifer's childlike innocent but cold eyes. She suddenly knelt on the ground. "Tell me." Charlotte once again grabbed Lucifer's collar and buried her head in it. "Tell me why. Why? Mr. Isom is clearly such a good person. Why? Who can tell me? Who told you that good people won't die? Lucifer told her in a low voice. This is the human world, not the church with only holy light and Mary that you have been staying in. This is reality. Chapter 949. Lord, I dedicate victory and glory to you. In front of heaven, the pure white unicorn slowly folded its wings and landed on the clouds. At this moment, a warrior wearing gold and silver armor with 3 pairs of light wings on his back dismounted from the unicorn. Several 2-winged angels wearing white clothes hurriedly stepped forward and shouted the name of this warrior, Lucifer, the great star of dawn, the archangel who ruled the angels, the star of victory that made hell tremble in fear. If not for the fact that there was no worship in heaven, the archangel Lucifer would probably have the most fans in heaven apart from him. Lord Lucifer, you came back early? An angel asked curiously. Lucifer took off his helmet. Angels had no gender, but Lucifer's beauty was enough to overshadow all the angels. Yes, the cleanup work was completed ahead of time. The angel troops are still behind, so I came back early to tell Father the good news. Lucifer smiled. It was a heartwarming smile. Even angels would be infected by this smile, as if happiness had already arrived, the star of dawn that brought hope to people. Where's Father? Lucifer continued to ask. The Lord is in his palace, an angel replied. One of the angels replied, however, the Lord is currently meeting with a guest and has instructed us not to disturb him. Lucifer was slightly startled. Father's guest? Is it the Buddha of paradise or the Lord of the end of the Ganges? However, this angel who knew the situation could only shake his head to answer this question. I don't know who it is, but it shouldn't be either of them. I see. Lucifer nodded. Continue to guard your post. I'll go in by myself. The angels guarding the palace had no objections. The archangel in front of them had become the left and right of God together with another archangel, Gabriel. They had the right to walk freely in heaven. Soon, Lucifer arrived at the place where the Lord was. Lord, I dedicate victory and glory to you. With a smile on his face, Lucifer pushed open the door of the hall. The main hall was filled with a myriad of colors. Even in heaven, it seemed that there was no other place filled with such magnificence. However, it had appeared in this main hall. Lucifer's eyes narrowed slightly at the large amount of colors floating in the air, as well as the sound that resounded in the hall. The quality this time is pretty good. It's enough to last for a long time. Hail Mary, you are full of divine favor, the Lord is with you, you are praised among women, your Son Jesus is praised. Mother Mary of God, pray for us sinners now and in our last moments. Amen. The sound of prayer. Lucifer slowly opened his eyes and frowned. A trace of doubt flashed in his eyes. Am I dreaming? Shaking her head, Lucifer stood up. Instead of worrying about her dreams, she was more concerned about being woken up. At this moment, Shalti grabbed a silver cross with both hands, lowered her head, and muttered softly. Isom is not a believer. Even if you pray for him, his soul will not enter heaven after death, even if he is a good person. These words made Shalti stop praying. Since the fruitless questioning last night, the young nun had been exhausted and sad, almost fainting. However, she did not sleep for the whole night. Instead, she silently accompanied the old nun. God loves the world. Shalti did not turn to look at Lucifer at this moment. There is no distinction between high and low. That's not necessarily true. Lucifer sneered at this moment. What he loves the most are those who can become Holy Spirit. Only with these Holy Spirits can heaven exist. But even these Holy Spirits are nothing more than tools at best. They are just consumables in his hands. Shalti didn't pay attention to Lucifer's words. He closed his eyes again and began to pray seriously. Lucifer did not mind at this time. He shrugged and left Shalti's side. Because the old nun had not woken up after the operation, Shalti basically could not walk away. Naturally, Lucifer could not go too far away. After hearing the news, Mr. Esam's wife dared to come overnight. However, she could only see the pale face of her husband who had lost his life. Shalty tried to comfort her, but in the end she was viciously scolded by the grief-stricken wife. The young nun silently endured. However, this was not even an episode for Lucifer. Separation of life and death was too common in a place like the hospital. She suddenly liked this place. On the one hand, it was because of the soil where despair bred. On the other hand, it was equivalent to a good breeding ground. Although she had inexplicably lost her power, and was imprisoned into the appearance of a child, she did not lose her knowledge. With so many materials, I should be able to make a good little guy. Lucifer walked toward the intensive care unit with a happy smile. When the propeller began to slow down, the noise seemed to become louder. The place where the helicopter landed was the village secretly built by the Song family. Luocio looked out of the window of the helicopter and could basically see the whole picture of the village. In fact, Gan Hong had already introduced the village to Luocio earlier. At this time, Luocio had a more intuitive feeling when he looked at the village that matched with Gan Hong's description. In addition to Luocio himself, Song Ying also went to the village. This trip was actually requested by Song Ying, because the date of returning to the country had been set, and it was not far away. Song Ying planned to visit Gan Hong before leaving. After thinking for a while, Song Tianyu agreed to Song Ying's request and asked Song Er to take care of her along the way. "How is it? Are you surprised?" Seeing Luocio at this time, Song Ying sitting next to him said proudly, "It took 20 years to build this village to its current size." "It's not easy," Luocio nodded, "but I feel more like a base than a village." In fact, this direct bird's-eye view was more detailed than what Gan Hong said. Luocio had seen several watchtowers, which seemed to be hiding some heavy artillery. What was more exaggerated was that he found a parking lot in the corner of the village, where several tanks were parked. Hearing this, Song Er, who was in the front passenger seat, laughed and said, "Young Master Chiu, you don't know. If the Song dynasty is the economic lifeline of the Song family, then this is the foundation of the Song family and the power to protect itself. Of course, it is also the power to attack. So it's not wrong to call it a base. It probably had the functions of training talents, some technical research, and recuperation for the wounded." While they were talking, the helicopter finally landed on the tarmac in the corner of the village. And here, there was already an off-road vehicle waiting to pick them up. As Gan Hong once said, Luocio saw not only a large residential area on the way, but also public facilities such as markets, shopping malls, schools, hospitals, and so on. According to Song Er's introduction, banknotes were just waste paper in the village, because the currency used for transactions here was actually a virtual evaluation value. Except for those under 16 years old, and those who were wounded and retired who could get a fixed amount of consumption points every month, everyone here needed to earn consumption points by themselves. There were various sources of consumption points. They could be used to stay on the job, to complete a certain task of the Song family, to participate in the collective activities of the Song family, to contribute to the village, or to obtain some new research results, etc. The laws outside did not apply here. All the evaluation was carried out by the Special Evaluation Department of the Song family. Although this base did not have a large population, it could be described as an independent, small country. After entering the village, Song Ying stretched and took a deep breath. She said comfortably, "The air outside really can't be compared to the air in the village." Perhaps it was because there was something called spirit chi gathered here? Luocio smiled slightly and looked at some strange pillars in the village. Because of these pillars, the spirit energy near the mountain slowly flowed into the valley like a river. This was probably the work of Mr. Blind. Growing up in an environment rich in spirit energy, although the possibility of giving birth to transcendence was still very small, it could still improve the villagers' physical fitness, and this was only the success of 20 years. If the environment of this village didn't change, then after generations, more outstanding human beings would be born. Luo Qiu suddenly thought, is this Mr. Blind intending to carry out this kind of experiment on the transformation of mortals here? Here we are. Song Air pointed at a building in front of them. This is the medical facility in the base. Song Ying looked at Song Air in surprise. Was he influenced by Luoqiu, so he changed the way he called the village to the base? Second instructor. At this time, a woman in a nurse uniform with a writing board in her hand came out. Song Air nodded. The nurse then greeted Song Ying and Luoqiu separately. What made Luoqiu curious was that the nurse actually knew him. Song Air smiled and said, Master Qiu did not appear in the base, but we already knew that you came back to the Song family. Although we haven't asked the people in the base to recognize you, we know that you're coming today, and you're standing beside Miss Ying, so it's not hard to guess. Luoqiu just smiled casually and said nothing, but the nurse peeked at him from time to time, looking very interested. At this time, Luo Qiu pointed at the girl's leg. She was stunned and looked down, only to find that her shoelaces were untied. The girl was embarrassed and quickly squatted down to tie the shoelaces. Then she said with a red face, Second instructor, you are here to see Sister Gan Hong, right? She is now doing rehabilitation in the physical therapy room. Song Ying was stunned. It's only been a few days. It's amazing that she can get out of bed, but she has already started rehabilitation training? The nurse said helplessly. The doctor also said it's impossible, but none of us can persuade Sister Gan Hong. She said that she doesn't want to lie in bed, which makes her feel like a disabled person. Song Ying frowned, saying in a low voice, take me to see her. On the passage covered with cotton bags there were 2 long tubes. Gan Hong was like this, holding the tubes with both hands and walking step by step with great difficulty. Every step was quite difficult for her. She needed to spend a lot of strength to move her ankles slightly. Her hair hung down, sweat drops could even be seen on her bangs. But she looked forward. The stubbornness in her eyes was unbearable to look at. In front of the glass mirror outside the physical therapy room, Song Ying put her palm on the glass and clenched it slightly. She opened her mouth, seemingly wanting to shout something, but in the end she closed her mouth tightly. How long has she been like this? Song Ying asked in a low voice. It's been almost 5 hours since this morning. The nurse sighed. Hasn't she rested? Sister Gan Hong has rested, the nurse said quickly. The young nurse quickly said. He also ate a lot of food, and then continued his rehabilitation training here. This girl. Song Ying sighed and shook her head. Forget it, maybe she really has her own ideas. At this time, Song Air suddenly said, Miss, don't you plan to stop Gan Hong? You have to do things step by step. It's useless to practice when the injury hasn't healed, right? At this time, Song Ying looked through the glass at Gan Hong, who was still moving forward step by step. She smiled bitterly and said, Song Air, have you ever wanted to give up no matter what? Have you ever felt despair and lost confidence in the future once you stopped? Song Air frowned. Song Ying sighed and said, since she knows how to rest and eat to replenish her strength, it proves that she knows her own condition, and it's not because of her temper. Although it's very difficult for her now, I'm afraid it's accompanied by pain. But after seeing the road she walked, the sweat she left behind, and her persistence, do you have the heart to ask her to stop? I want her to stop more than any of you, and I'm even more worried about her physical condition than she is. But facing her like this, I know I can't do it at all. Shaking her head, Song Ying took a deep breath. What we can do is to believe that she can do it and can fully recover. Go and get ready. Once she can't take it anymore and collapses, immediately conduct a checkup. We don't want to stay here. If she knows that her sorry state has been seen, it will only make her more uncomfortable. Let's go. I say. Song Air's face was a little strange at this time. Song Ying was stunned and asked subconsciously, what's wrong? Song Air swallowed and pointed to the room in front. That? Master Chiu seems to have gone in. What? Song Ying was stunned, and then her eyes widened. Luoqiu walked in without them noticing, with a water bottle in his hand, and walked in front of Gan Hong. Gan Hong was slightly stunned. Then she took the bottle of water handed over by Luo Qiu and drank it. That's not right. Gan Hong doesn't seem to be unwilling to let others see her in such a sorry state. Song Air couldn't help but mutter, isn't it because she's very happy to see young Master Chiu? Chapter 950. Gan Hong lowered her head and gasped for breath. At the same time, she looked at the sweat dripping from her hair. The doctor said that this kind of rehabilitation training should not be too intense. It should be done for 2 hours a day. But Gan Hong felt that her body could bear it. Although she was very tired now, it was much easier than when she was training in school. The special class in school not only had a high elimination rate, but also a high mortality rate. And the degree of this kind of rehabilitation training, if it was only to this extent, it's almost time to replenish some water. A voice. Gan Hong suddenly raised her head and saw Luoqiu walking towards her with a bottle of water. Gan Hong's heart skipped a beat as she said in astonishment, "Young Master Chiu, drink some water first. You are sweating too much." Luoqiu unscrewed the cap of the bottle and then gave it to Gan Hong. Luoqiu had already done this, so Gan Hong had no reason to refuse. "Thank you, Master Chiu." Luoqiu shook his head and said, "When you were in my house, didn't you pour water for me many times? This is nothing. This is not the same." Gan Hong shook her head. "I was given to you by my father to do some small things. It's nothing." Luoqiu smiled and then asked, "What did the doctor say?" Gan Hong said, "As long as I do more training, I can basically fully recover. It will not affect my athletic ability in the future, but I am afraid that my flexibility will be a little worse." When talking about flexibility, Gan Hong's face was a little gloomy. It seemed that before she was injured, her body's flexibility should be very good. "By the way, is the place where you were injured?" Luoqiu suddenly stretched out his hand and pressed Gan Hong's back. The strength was very light, as if he was touching it. "No, a little further down." Gan Hong shook her head. "If it went further down, it would reach the tailbone, which was almost to the buttock." Luoqiu did not touch it this time. He just looked sideways. "This place. That thing is really good at hitting." Gan Hong shook her head and smiled bitterly. "In that situation, I was lucky enough to survive. At least, I still had the chance to stand up and walk." Luoqiu nodded and said, "Optimism is a good thing. But no matter what, I hope you can recover completely." Perhaps it was an illusion, but after Master Chiu let go of her, Gan Hong felt a faint numbness at the back of her waist, but it was only for a moment. "Master Chiu, why did you come to the village?" This was what Gan Hong wanted to know the most. Luoqiu said bluntly, "Me? I was dragged here by Song Ying, and the main reason is to see you." "Miss Ying?" Gan Hong was stunned. Luoqiu looked at the glass wall of the physical rehabilitation room with a smile in her eyes. Song Ying's hands were pressed against the glass wall, and her face was almost touching it. Her eyes were wide open. "I'll leave the rest to her." Luoqiu smiled. "Today should be a good day." Song Ying and Gan Hong sat on the bench beside the wall of the physical training room in silence. Song Ying's eyes wandered around the corner for a while, and then suddenly turned to Gan Hong. "Right! Miss Ying." It turned out that Gan Hong also intended to break the silence at this moment. Their gazes met. Song Ying was stunned for a moment before she laughed out loud. Gan Hong, on the other hand, relaxed her expression. Song Ying said softly, "How have you been these days?" Gan Hong said seriously, "I'll recover as soon as possible, and then return to my post." Song Ying said, "What post? You mean return to Luoqiu's side?" Gan Hong said seriously, "That day, Dad announced that I'll be Master Chiu from now on." Song Ying shook her head, and suddenly reached out to hold Gan Hong's face. She stared at her and said, "Tell me honestly, Why didn't you reject my grandpa? You should know that if you don't want to, even grandpa won't force you. Why? Gan Hong said calmly, we have been trained since we were young, learning various skills. There are many girls like me who are out there carrying out missions. For the sake of achieving their goals, they will do anything. Their bodies are just tools for us to use. Miss Ing, don't you think that compared to them, I am considered lucky? Song Ing did not blink, and neither did Gan Hong. After a while, Song Ing sighed and released her hands. Forget it. If that's the only reason, then congratulations, you've achieved your goal. Gan Hong replied coolly. Give me your hand, Song Ing suddenly said. Gan Hong was puzzled, but she still extended her hand. Song Ying's hand suddenly slapped heavily on Gan Hong's palm. It was not a slap. Instead, Gan Hong felt something being placed on her palm. Don't just give this away. Song Ying stood up. With her back facing Gan Hong, she walked toward the training pole. That fellow said so. Gan Hong lowered her head to look at the item on her palm, a silver-white bracelet. She suddenly smiled faintly. What are you waiting for? Song Ying suddenly shouted. Didn't you say that you need to recover as soon as possible? Then don't be lazy. I don't have much time. At most, I can accompany you for 1 or 2 hours. You should be content. Perhaps it was a kind of luck. To be able to meet Miss Ing and Master Chiu. Gan Hong stood up with difficulty and walked slowly toward the training equipment. She walked very slowly, but Song Ing did not come to help her. She just looked at her with a smile. They were both gentle people. Later, Gan Hong went to see Song Ing and Luoqiu off. However, Song Er did not accompany them this time, because he still had some things to do in the village. He could only go back tomorrow. Go back. You've had a hard day. Take a good bath. Song Ing waved at Gan Hong, and then quickly walked into the cabin of the helicopter. Luoqiu followed behind, but Gan Hong suddenly shouted, Master Chiu, what's the matter? Gan Hong looked at Luoqiu's face. She didn't know if it was an illusion. The feeling Master Chiu gave her was almost the same as when she first saw him on the train. However, the Song family quietly changed because of his arrival. I'll recover as soon as possible, Gan Hong said seriously. Luoqiu just smiled and said nothing. He just said, goodbye. Before leaving, the helicopter slowly rose into the air. Song Er patted Gan Hong's shoulder and said gently, if you want to catch up with him, you should recover as soon as possible. You can catch up, right? I've taught so many students, but there are not many women who can persist. And you're the best among them. Gan Hong nodded to Song Er. Song Er suddenly said at this time, in fact, when Master said to give you to the new little child, I was against it and even worried. But now it's okay. You can take the opportunity to get away from Master Chiu temporarily while recovering. Second instructor, I don't understand what you mean. Gan Hong frowned. Song Er suddenly said, this is Master's idea, right? He likes to do this kind of thing. Did he tell you that if you can climb to the bed of the little child, then you'll have something to look forward to? Gan Hong's expression slightly stiffened. Song Er shook his head at this time, but now it seems that the road you chose doesn't seem to work. Although I can't read faces like a blind person, I can still roughly tell what a person is like. Don't even mention climbing into this young Master Chiu's bed. Whether or not I can even get close to his heart is a problem. This Master Chiu seems modest, but he's more ruthless than anyone else. Second instructor, I don't think so. Gan Hong shook her head. Song Er said, I mean his ruthlessness is not the kind of cold-bloodedness, how should I put it? Song Er frowned. If you want to describe it, I'm afraid it should be described as Taishang emotionless. But, how can a person abandon the 7 emotions and 6 desires and achieve Taishang emotionless? That's the realm of a real sage. So I'm afraid this kind of ruthlessness needs to be carefully studied. Well, I feel it's more powerful than the so-called Taoist heart of the blind man. Gan Hong's eyes were full of doubts. Song Air could only say, "It's fine if you don't understand. You can just treat this as the intuition of us martial artists. You should know that as martial artists, our perception is extremely sharp. This young Master Chiu is not simple." "I'll pay attention to it, second instructor." Gan Hong nodded. Song Air said helplessly, "It seems you didn't take it seriously." "Forget it, I'm just saying. It's up to you how to do it. But now I can tell you a piece of good news." Gan Hong cast a doubtful look. But at this moment, a row of SUVs suddenly came from afar. These off-road vehicles were all full. Young men and women in combat uniforms walked out of the off-road vehicles one after another, and then quickly lined up in formation. They raised their heads and puffed out their chests, standing with their hands behind their backs, looking imposing. "Second instructor, they are all reserve members," Song Air said indifferently. "From now on, they are under your command. Master hopes that you can bring these reservists to your hometown and train them as soon as possible." Gan Hong opened her mouth slightly. Song Air smiled. "That is to say, from the moment they enter, they are equivalent to your revenge force." Gan Hong was silent for a moment. "Why?" Song Air sighed and said, "Of course it's because Master and young Master agreed." Gan Hong, Master and young Master know your thoughts better than anyone else. Of course, you became Miss Ying's guard, and you two successfully became very good friends. But from the beginning to the end, you never asked Miss Ying to help you with this matter. Master and young Master feel that you sincerely treat Miss Ying as a friend, and not a tool for your revenge. Gan Hong lowered her head in silence. Song Air continued, "We all know that if you take the initiative to ask Miss Ying, with Miss Ying's personality, she will help you no matter what. But you didn't. Even when Master gave you to Master Chiu in advance, and young Master gave you this idea, you would rather become Master Chiu's woman than ask Miss Ying for help, right? Gan Hong, people's hearts are made of flesh. Especially this time, you risked your life to save Miss Ying. Your persistence finally moved Master, so he gave these reserve members to you. As for me, I will also be your advisor. Of course, this has to wait until you get better." Second instructor. "I don't want to treat my most cherished friend as a tool for my revenge." Song Air stretched out his hand and pressed Gan Hong's head. "From now on, you are a graduate." Only the fiery red clouds were left. Gan Hong gazed at the clouds in the distance. She was wearing the silver bracelet that she had taken off before. The night breeze was a little cool. Gan Hong tidied up her messy hair. She suddenly remembered that not long ago, her father had given her to young Master Chiu in front of everyone. At that time, Master Chiu said he would find an appropriate time to talk to her father and set her free. But today it seemed that it had come true. As if he already knew everything, as if he didn't care about anything. But for some reason, it seemed that everything would eventually go in a good direction. Strange guy, all negative emotions could be turned into power. Because hatred, jealousy, anger, and so on could make ordinary people burst out extraordinary power, not to mention the demon who used it as food, let alone the Queen of Hell. How much despair was there in the intensive care unit, and how much death was there in the hospital morgue? These were obviously some good materials for the current Lucifer. Of course, if she didn't become like this, these things really couldn't enter her eyes. She still used the power of words. Although the power of the abyss of hell was very weak in the main world, as one of the kings of hell, she could always sense it. Lucifer was ready to absorb the despair in the intensive care unit. At this time, she had moved to the morgue, chanting the syllables of the ancient language, and at the same time raising her hands. In the dim and cold morgue, a green luster suddenly lit up. At this time, Lucifer suddenly bit her finger, then lay on the ground and began to draw a complicated array on the floor with her blood. Of course, this aura of death and despair was only a medium for this ritual. The real master was still Lucifer's own blood. Well, the descending array has been completed. Next, it depends on luck. Lucifer stood up, announce the infinite scale of fate, obey the contract of the ancient language, and respond to me. Servant of the void. The blood array suddenly shone with a dazzling light, and a burst of purple smoke suddenly appeared in the array. They circled around and sped up. Suddenly, a red light flashed in the middle of the thick purple smoke. This red light suddenly slashed apart all of the purple smoke. Thus, a woman wearing black leather armor, a black veil, and a mouth mask, holding a crimson spear in her hand, slowly opened her eyes. Lucifer squinted at this time. It's the spirit of the Queen of the Shadow Country. It seems that I'm very lucky this time. She looked at Lucifer and said indifferently, "Are you the one who summoned my projection? Should I call you the Queen of Hell or the Star of Dawn? Just call me by my name." Lucifer shrugged. "Lucifer. Then, I'll have to trouble you during this time, my servant." Yin 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 yin. Chapter 951. Her blood-red pupils were now sizing up the hospital morgue in the main world. Lucifer knew the origin of the servant in front of him, and he was quite curious at this time. Generally speaking, the summoning has a tendency. Although I know that with a large amount of despair and death aura as a medium, the summoned servant is basically inclined towards the undead, I didn't expect Her Highness the Queen to respond to the summoning this time. I'm really flattered. With the summoner's rank, why not? The woman with the red spear in front of him responded indifferently, "The King of Hell is almost the end." Lucifer shrugged. Among the summoning agreements signed by so many mythological systems back then, as the guardian of the Shadow Kingdom, aren't you also the top? A person who kills a god with a human body can be said to have the power of a demigod, immortal and immortal. The woman with the red spear didn't continue, but suddenly frowned. "The contract is a little unstable. My arrival requires the summoner to provide a steady stream of power, but the source of the power channel is dry. Your Majesty Lucifer, you seem to be sealed, right?" Lucifer opened her hands at this time, and on her hands and neck, a looming shackle suddenly appeared, and on the shackle, there was a chain connected to nothingness. "First of all, this," Lucifer said indifferently at this time, "Gabriel's sacred artifact, the shackles of order, can you cut it open?" "I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. Gabriel's rank is the same as yours, and under the protection of that existence's brilliance, I can't open its sacred artifact." The Queen of the Shadow Kingdom shook her head at this time. Lucifer didn't mind. After all, she wasn't a small character in the main world outside the main world, but whether it was on the side of heaven or the side of hell now, she was a commander who could make decisions. Naturally, she knew. "What about the others?" Lucifer asked again suddenly. The Queen of the Shadow Kingdom frowned slightly and then stared at Lucifer's body seriously. After a long time, the Queen of the Shadow Kingdom suddenly raised the dark red spear in her hand and suddenly stabbed at Lucifer. However, just as the tip of the dark red short spear was about to pierce through Lucifer's forehead, it was blocked by something. At the same time, the sound of chains sliding could be heard around Lucifer's body. These chains were covered in a cold light, which was different from the chains on Gabriel's holy artifact, the shackles of order. The moment they appeared, they quickly wrapped around the Shadow Country Queen's dark red short spear. The Queen of the Shadow Kingdom was taken aback. She quickly retracted the short gun in her hand, and then looked at Lucifer solemnly. After a while, she slowly said, "Queen of Hell, who have you offended to actually exert such a degree of fate power?" "At most, I can only say that I accidentally offended you." Lucifer didn't mind and said, "But since it can't be broken, it doesn't matter. I didn't have much hope in the first place." The Queen of the Shadow Kingdom nodded and then retracted the dark red short spear. Lucifer said at this time, "I can't provide you with power now, so the problem of maintaining consumption can only be solved by you. Although you are the top servant, it is also your duty to solve problems for the summoner. There isn't much death aura in this hospital." The Queen of the Shadow Kingdom shook her head and said indifferently, "It seems that the master who summoned me this time is not much better than trash." Ha 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 ha. Lucifer suddenly laughed. In this world, there are not many people who dare to call me trash. Queen of the Shadow Kingdom, aren't you afraid that one day I will take back my power, and then take your body from the ancient contract and play with it wantonly? The Queen of the Shadow Kingdom glanced at Lucifer expressionlessly, and then slowly retreated until she finally disappeared into the shadows. Lucifer smiled slightly at this time, and then moved his neck. He knew that the Queen of the Shadow Kingdom hadn't left, but was hiding. As long as he called, she would appear. Lucifer looked around at this time, and suddenly muttered, "Well, there are still some leftovers left after the summoning, so I'll use them to make something small?" On the roof of the hospital, the Queen of the Shadow Kingdom stood on the railing, overlooking the city of God. Basically, spirits like her, who were summoned under the ancient contract, would be instilled with a lot of information about the main world the moment they crossed over to the main world, so that they could fully adapt to this era. The Queen of the Shadow Kingdom slowly sighed at this time, and murmured, "Cuchulainn, is this the world you reincarnated in, this third master's world? Life is impermanent." The old lady finally woke up, which should be the happiest thing for Shalty in a short period of time, but after hearing about Mr. Esam, the old lady was silent for a while. Later, when the priest of the local church learned that the old lady had woken up, he specially came from the church, accompanied by another nun, about 40 years old. The priest also brought another piece of news. "You want me to stay here?" The old lady looked at the priest of the cathedral with some surprise, frowning with some puzzlement. The priest smiled at this time and said, "Old lady, in view of your current physical condition, we think it would be more appropriate for you to stay here. You don't have to worry about the convent, we have already selected someone to replace you. It will be over in 2 days." The old lady glanced at Shalty, and found that Shalty was nervously clutching the corner of her clothes, so she gave her a comforting look and nodded. "Since this is the church's decision, then I have nothing to object to. But I have watched this child grow up since she was a child, and she has not graduated from my school yet. Can Shalty also stay?" The priest laughed heartily at this time and said, "Of course it will take a long time for you to recover. How can there be no one to take care of you? Don't worry, we have already prepared a long time ago, and have also prepared a dormitory for Miss Shalty." "That's great." The old lady smiled slightly. The priest looked at Shalty at this time and said, "Shalty, about your growth, in fact, old lady has been recording it for us. In view of your performance over the years, I am now formally begging you, hoping that you can temporarily stay in the church here to further your studies. I don't know if you are willing?" Can I? Shalty was stunned, feeling incredulous. Staying in the cathedral here to further her studies meant that she might be appointed to a new place in the future, and then be in charge of a convent. The old lady came out of the cathedral here, but all these years she had been staying in the convent where she grew up. "There is nothing you can't do." The priest laughed at this time and said, "As long as you have this confidence and work hard because of this confidence, if you don't give up halfway, success will not leave you. But old lady, I am afraid—" "Shalty, since the priest has said so, just accept it." The old lady smiled and said, "As for whether you can do it or not, that will have to wait for you to try." Shalty gritted her teeth and finally nodded. "Okay, then I will leave it to you in the future, father." The priest still had a kind smile on his face, but at this time, his smile was a little stiff. In this ward, there was a little girl. From the moment he came in, he noticed the little girl's existence, but for some reason, he always subconsciously avoided the little girl's sight. "Speaking of which, who is this child?" the priest finally asked. "She is." Shalty opened her mouth at this time. But the old lady suddenly said, "This child was entrusted to me by a sincere believer by the Lord's side. Her parents are long gone, so I can only take care of her." "Oh, I see." The priest nodded. "It's okay, since this is the case, let her stay. The dormitory we provided for Shalty is enough for this child to stay." Then, old lady, I will not disturb you, I will leave first. There are still some things in the church, I need to go back and deal with it. It is not something urgent, right? The old lady suddenly asked at this time. Father, I saw that before you came in, you seemed to be a little worried. The priest sighed at this time, shook his head and said, Actually, it is not a big matter, but it is also not a small matter. If it is not handled well, it will have a very bad effect. The old lady was stunned. The nun next to the priest sighed at this time and said, Old lady, you don't know. Recently, a strange church suddenly appeared here. Among our believers, some of them even changed their beliefs. Today, there are several loyal brothers who are planning to leave the church. The priest is rushing back to see if he can persuade them. There is such a thing. The old lady opened her mouth in surprise. What kind of church can actually? The old lady's words suddenly stopped here, because she knew that if she did not stop, what she said would be a blasphemy to God. We don't know, it suddenly appeared. The priest smiled bitterly. We only know that it is called Baki Church. There is a messenger of God in this church. He can bring miracles. I am afraid that it is some kind of deception. Alas, we have reported this matter to the local police station, but every time it is left unsettled. I really hope that they can do something as soon as possible. Lucifer, who was yawning in the corner, suddenly looked over at this time. What did she just hear? Baki Church? Can you eat slower? In a high-class restaurant, Buggy looked at Cage, who was eating with some helplessness. Did this guy starve to death in his previous life? How many strange eyes in this high-class restaurant are looking at him? If it were not for the mask on his face that changed his face, Buggy actually had the impulse to drill into a hole in the ground. Boss Gibba, you don't know. I didn't even have time to eat. Cage began to speak in a low voice. I rushed to the little nun's village that night and asked about her from door to door. Then I rushed back without stopping, and on the way, I just took a nap in the car. Even when I passed by the drive-in restaurant, I didn't buy a burger to eat. Stop, you don't have to report what happened in the middle to me. Buggy suddenly stopped. Tell me what you asked. Cage then said, the little nun's name is Shalti. She was abandoned in front of the monastery and then adopted. This year, she is not yet 18 years old. Boss Gibba, you know these nuns, I think this Shalti must be a pure woman, he. That's it? Buggy frowned at this time. Cage said awkwardly, these two nuns usually live in the monastery and rarely come out. She would only appear in the village market when she needed to buy some daily necessities, so she really didn't know much. They all said that Charty was a kind child, but she was already a nun, so she couldn't be cruel, right? Oh right, there's one more thing. I just saw on the church's Facebook that Shalti seems to be staying in the church for further study. Staying here? Buggy was stunned, and then suddenly felt a little happy. After all, if Shalti wanted to go back, it was really inconvenient for him. He could not spend time on the road every day. Wait a minute. Buggy suddenly felt that something was wrong, then he looked at Cage, who was eating spaghetti. What did you just say? The church's Facebook? Cage nodded with a bunch of spaghetti in his mouth. Why do you have the church's Facebook account? Buggy asked curiously. Cage sucked in a mouthful of spaghetti, then said, because I'm a believer, and believers will follow each other. What's so strange about that? You're a believer? Buggy's face was full of disbelief. My God, you have faith? Cage smiled awkwardly at this time. Actually, it's just in name. Boss Gibba, don't you know that as a believer there are a lot of benefits? For example, during the personnel inspection, as a believer, there will be bonus points. Last time when I was locked up because of Boss Buggy, the church helped me, otherwise I would not have been released so quickly. But to be honest, recently I've been considering whether to transfer or not. Anyway, I'm now following you, Boss Gibba, and it doesn't feel right to be a believer. Transfer to what? Buggy rolled his eyes. This guy was probably a typical example of someone who would go wherever there were benefits. He actually described changing his faith as a transfer, which was really rare. Boss Gibba, don't you know? Cage said seriously. Of course it's the Buggy Church. Now this church is the most popular and the richest. I've heard that anyone who joins the church will receive a huge gift package from the church. Tens of thousands. When did this happen? Buggy opened his mouth. Why didn't he know about it? But Buggy stared at Cage seriously and said, "What are you talking about? It's great now. Who said that we can't believe in Jesus? Haven't you heard of a big shot called Heavy Cannon? He's a priest. You're not allowed to transfer." But the big gift, is this enough? Buggy was rich and overbearing. At this time, he directly threw a thick stack of cash at Cage's face. "Go to the church every day to call for me, then be friends with Charlotte and introduce her to me. If you do well, I'll smash you to death with money." Whoa whoa whoa. Amen. Yen 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 yen. Chapter 952. Suddenly emerging from midair, the Queen of the Shadow Kingdom looked at the world. Her body slowly landed on the street, and everyone seemed to have ignored her existence. The pedestrians were hurrying, and the traffic was heavy. She stood quietly on the street. The reflection of the Queen of the Shadow Kingdom could be seen in the window glass of the shops on the street. She glanced at her reflection, and a purple light suddenly appeared on her body. In an instant, the black gauze-like clothes of the Queen of the Shadow Kingdom disappeared, and it was replaced by a white sleeveless sweater and jeans. The Queen of the Shadow Kingdom looked at her outfit and took a step in front of the house. After this step, she seemed to have really come to this world and appeared in the sight of passers-by. Her long hair fell to her waist, and she had an almost perfect figure without any extra fat. The Queen of the Shadow Kingdom walked slowly on the street. Despite this, due to the ancient contract, she couldn't be too far away from her summoner. Although the guy who summoned her could barely be considered to be one who stood at the top of the gods, it was an indisputable fact that Lucifer couldn't provide her with the power to manifest all the time. If it weren't for the fact that her body was also a demigod existence, she would probably be troubled by how to maintain her manifestation at this time. But it was fine if she didn't fight. Once she fought, after about 2 or 3 battles, she would also face this problem. However, in order to prepare for a rainy day, she also needed to find a solution as soon as possible. The Queen of the Shadow Kingdom already had some considerations in her mind about how to supplement the power called magic power outside of her summoner. The most direct way was naturally to find someone with magic power, build a temporary channel, and extract something like magic power from the other party. It was just that there weren't many people with magic power in this world. Modern society. The Queen of the Shadow Kingdom looked at the tall buildings around her and the vehicles emitting exhaust fumes on the road. "It's really polluted." The Queen of the Shadow Kingdom shook her head, but soon she stopped her footsteps. The reason was that a blonde woman with a smile was walking towards her. Her eyes couldn't help but light up. For the Queen of the Shadow Kingdom, who had the ability to see other people's talents, she could always be attracted to those who were rich and talented, but only those who had extraordinary talents could really enter her eyes. And the blonde woman in front of her seemed to have infinite talent. This was something that the Queen of Shadow Country had never seen before in her life. So, the blonde woman also stopped, and her eyes were attracted to the Queen of Shadow Country. Contract spirit? It's really surprising that one of the highest ranks was summoned here. The blonde woman smiled. She turned out to be the club's maid. The Queen of the Shadow Kingdom looked at the other party again. She didn't care too much about the fact that the other party had exposed part of her truth. Not only did the other party possess limitless talent, but he also possessed a powerful and obscure power. The Queen of the Shadow instantly made an estimation in her heart. Perhaps even if her true body in the ancient contract personally descended, it would still be somewhat powerless. "Who are you, the person who exudes infinite talent?" The Queen of Shadow Country was silent for a moment and asked softly. "Me." Yu Yi smiled faintly, maid. The Queen of the Shadow Kingdom opened her mouth slightly. The blonde woman standing in front of her had a beauty comparable to the legendary moon goddess on Mount Olympus, but she didn't attract the pedestrians on the road, probably because she had cast some kind of spell on her. It was just that the other party was holding a large paper bag in her hand, and there were all kinds of things in it. She looked like a person who had just come back from shopping. Had she lived in this main world for some time, and had even completely integrated into modern society? Don't mind me too much. The maid smiled and said, I have no malice towards anyone. I just came out today to buy some spices. Because I don't know when the next one will come, so I need to store some. You seem to want to stay away from this place? The Queen of the Shadow Kingdom was slightly surprised. Well, it'll be soon. The servant girl said softly, about these 2 days. As a contract spirit, you shouldn't be able to leave your summoner too far away. I've looked around this city, and the only one who is qualified to summon an existence like you is probably only that person, the Queen of Hell, His Highness Lucifer. The Queen of the Shadow Kingdom suddenly opened her eyes at this time. She stretched out her hand and a dark red shotgun appeared. Her sacred power of destiny, was it you who exerted it? Finally, the Queen of the Shadow Kingdom's rare talent allowed her to see something from the blonde woman who claimed to be a maid that was of the same origin as Lucifer's strange power of destiny. Not me. Miss Maid smiled. Please put away your weapon, will you? Originally, we had no reason to fight. I think His Highness Lucifer shouldn't be able to perform the duties of a summoner now. In that case, why would you waste your strength under such circumstances? The Queen of the Shadow Kingdom didn't move. Just as she saw through some of the other party's essence, the other party had almost seen through all of her. Besides, if we really want to fight... The maid suddenly narrowed her eyes. I'm afraid this city will be destroyed. Let's not talk about whether this will violate your purpose. If it's just me, I'm afraid I'll be punished by the master. Okay. The Queen of the Shadow Kingdom sighed, retracted the short gun in her hand, and shook her head. In fact, I can't find a reason to fight with you, although I'm also eager to fight with you. A natural interest in fighting. The maid nodded. If you want, you can buy this service. We will try our best to satisfy you. With that, the maid stretched out her palm, and a black card appeared between her fingers, and then flew to the Queen of the Shadow Kingdom. The Queen of the Shadow Kingdom's pupils suddenly shrank a little, and she subconsciously reached out to take it. Is that so? So the so-called unintentional offense by my summoner was referring to this place. Then there's really no other way. Looking forward to your visit, guest. The servant girl smiled and nodded. Then, she walked past the Queen of Shadow Country with her paper bag full of trophies in her arms. I've been here before. The Queen of the Shadow Kingdom suddenly turned around and looked at the maid's back. You weren't there at that time. If I remember correctly, the master at that time was called Miss Skaha. The maid suddenly turned around and interrupted the Queen of the Shadow Kingdom. The other party directly called out her name. The Queen of the Shadow Kingdom. Skaha's expression froze at this time, and she only heard the other party staring at her with a very shallow gaze. In an instant, Skaha felt a terrible will that almost erased her from everything. This will even surpassed the power of the ancient contract where her body was. But the maid suddenly smiled, making this terrible feeling disappear without a trace. Would you like to try the barbecue in the shop in front? It tastes pretty good. Thank you for your advice. You're welcome. It wasn't until the maid's back disappeared that the Queen of the Shadow Kingdom suddenly reached out and grabbed her arm, feeling a slight tremor on her arm. Unexpectedly, unknowingly, Skaha suddenly bit her lip, her eyes shining, and a smile appeared on her face. I'm excited. Trembling, as if it was just an illusion for a moment. He slowly opened his eyes and glanced at the rod-like object that was wrapped in a piece of cloth at the bottom of his arms. Jayberg. He frowned. Why are you trembling? While he was contemplating, a voice suddenly came from beside him. Mr. Cook, we will land in 10 minutes. Please be ready. There was a whistling wind outside. At this time, he was high in the sky. This trip had lasted nearly 12 hours. Since not long ago, the headquarters of the Michael Club in Paradise Island sent one of the 12 godly generals, Wolf King Rob, to investigate the destruction of the branch by an unknown force. Wolf King Rob suddenly disappeared. With the ability of the club, it took more than a month to find the trace of Wolf King Rob. 2 days ago, the club received news that another small branch was attacked. So this time, the club directly sent Cook. At this moment, Cook opened the cabin of the helicopter and looked down. The wind wantonly blew his hair, and Cook's eyes suddenly became a little cold. At this time, the pilot in front suddenly said, "Mr. Cook, I received a notice that the branch was attacked again. This time, the attacker even went deep into the branch base and is wantonly destroying it." "Got it, hover, I'll go down directly." Cook turned back and said simply. He raised his hand, and the long spear Jayberg in his hand instantly pierced out, and the cloth wrapped around the spear was directly shattered at this moment. Boom! There was a huge explosion. The fire illuminated everyone's face. In the narrow passage, 7 or 8 big men with machine guns in their hands were crazily shooting in the flames, and their target was a woman in a black leather windbreaker. The power of the bullets was very powerful because this was the club's equipment for the regular staff. However, this special bullet couldn't shake the woman in the black windbreaker, because a large number of bullets stopped in front of the woman and couldn't move forward. The woman in the black windbreaker seemed to have an invisible wall in front of her. No, it should be said that there were blue electric arcs flashing around her all the time. The electric arcs in front of her weaved into an electric net, directly blocking all the bullets that were shot at her. Damn it! Kill this monster! The men with guns were crazily shouting at this moment, but the woman in the black windbreaker was unmoved. At this moment, she gently waved her hand, and a huge electric arc directly shot out in the air. The electric arc passed through the passageway, and in an instant, all the electronic devices in the passageway exploded. The bodies of the armed men seemed to have been hit by a strong electric shock, and they all cried out in pain. In the end, their bodies became charred black and finally, they fell to the ground. In an instant, the passage became unusually quiet. The woman in the black windbreaker slowly exhaled and walked to the end of the corridor. There was an electronic door in front of her, blocking her way. But she directly pressed her palm on the electronic lock, and the electric current spurted out from her palm, instantly making the electronic lock useless. She used both hands to force the door open. At this moment, a loud noise suddenly came from behind the door. It was the sound of a gun being fired. A bullet directly shot at her forehead at this moment, but she didn't panic. Her eyes narrowed, and several electric arcs suddenly appeared in the air, completely entangling the bullet. The bullet finally stopped in front of her. Monster! This room was filled with all kinds of surveillance devices, and it was similar to a battle command room. At this time, a man in a black suit screamed in horror. He saw with his own eyes how the bullet was blocked by this supernatural power. Since he couldn't fight with force, he could only run away. However, the moment this thought appeared in his mind, the horrible woman in front of him waved her hand, and the bullet that was suspended in the air was instantly reflected. Ah! The bullet instantly pierced through his left knee, and the sharp pain made his whole face twist. He fell to the ground and cold sweat poured out. He kept moving backward until there was no place to retreat. He had already leaned against the control panel. The woman in the black windbreaker walked to the front of the man and said coldly, "Hand over the electronic key." I don't know what you're talking about." Every director of the club, no matter big or small, has a key. This key can open the passage, and allow the network of the club to directly connect to the mainframe of Paradise Island. You tell me you don't know? How did you? The man was shocked, and he immediately gritted his teeth. The director here has already left. You've got the wrong person, I don't have such a thing. Since you don't have it, Then there's no point in keeping you here," she said indifferently, and then reached out with her hand. Suddenly, a large amount of electric arcs gathered at the center of her palm, and then gradually stretched out, finally forming a simple cross-shaped sword. "I hope you can take it," the woman in the black windbreaker sneered, and then she held the sword formed by the electric arcs with both hands, and was about to stab it into the man's chest. "No!" Just as the man screamed in horror, the woman in the black windbreaker suddenly stopped, and her body rolled to the side. At the same time, a red light flashed, and a dark red spear was inserted into the control panel. "Who?" The woman in the black windbreaker suddenly looked towards the entrance, only to see a man who seemed to have experienced the vicissitudes of life standing there calmly. The woman in the black windbreaker frowned, and her face became serious. "Cook? Michael Clubb's 12 Immortal Generals. I didn't expect to attract such a big shot like you." Cook was also looking at the woman in the black windbreaker, and then walked into the room. Obviously, the branch seemed to have made a mistake this time. The criminal who attacked this branch was obviously not the same one that Wolf King Luo Bo investigated last time. Luo Bo had to deal with a princess from the ancient East, Xianyuan royal family. And the one in front of him seemed familiar. "Do you know me?" Cook frowned and looked at the other party seriously. "I seem to have seen you somewhere before." "Have you forgotten?" The woman in the black windbreaker sneered, but her body slightly stepped back. "It doesn't matter if you have forgotten, because now I have nothing to do with the past. I'm just an avenger." "An avenger?" Cook nodded. With a wave of his hand, the dark red spear that was inserted into the console flew back into his hand. "Then let me see how fierce your flames of revenge are." The woman in the black windbreaker took a deep breath. "Today I may die here. Yen, are you okay?" Yen. Chapter 953. The dark blue electric arcs formed an electric net in the air, but Cook's long spear swept over. The long spear instantly flashed with a bright light, breaking the electric net directly. Then, the long spear swept toward the body of the woman in the black windbreaker. Bang! The woman in the black windbreaker was sent flying by the impact. Cook stood with the spear in one hand. He suddenly stopped attacking and looked forward. The woman in the black windbreaker crossed her arms in front of her body, but the way she bent her body was a little special. "Are you from Paradise Island?" Cook kept silent for a while and said indifferently, "Your body skills are from Paradise Island." "Well, usually the field personnel learn it." The woman in the black windbreaker shook her hands. Her hands were numb just by blocking Cook's sweep. If she hadn't set up an electric net to reduce most of the force, the bones in her arms would have been broken. The 12 Immortal Generals of the club were really terrifying, even though she had been crazily developing the power of thunder from that man. "No." Unexpectedly, Cook frowned. "With your strength, you can't just be a field personnel. At least you should be an elite fighter. Scan identity check." Cook suddenly muttered. The half-moon collar he wore on his neck suddenly flashed a little. "You're really a field personnel?" Cook looked at the woman in the black windbreaker up and down with surprise. "Jessica? Hello." The woman in the black windbreaker. Jessica suddenly put on a smile and said something that surprised Cook, but at this moment, Jessica suddenly squatted on the ground, pressing her hands on the floor. The electric light bounced on the floor, then like a wild horse, it directly hit Cook's body. Crackling sounds broke out in the air, and a large number of electric arcs directly exploded on Cook's body. However, Cook didn't react at all. Instead, he walked towards Jessica directly. "Although I don't know why a field personnel suddenly got such a level of strength, it's still too far away. This level of electric current should be at least 10 times stronger to cause trouble to me." "Really? Then as you wish." At this moment, Jessica let out an angry roar. In a split second, the blue electric light surged crazily. "Why don't you follow me back to Paradise Island? It would be a waste to die here." Cook shook his head. He was still strolling in the terrifying lightning. "I'll go one day." Jessica suddenly shouted. Cook heaved a sigh of relief. He gently waved the dark red spear in his hand, and the electric arcs on his body were instantly dispersed. Fine. Just be prepared to get hurt. I'll take you back. But at this moment, something suddenly flew towards Cook from all directions. However, his spear technique was already at the expert level. Like real lightning, the dark red spear pierced out in 4 directions in an instant, knocking away all the things that were coming towards him. Pistols, iron plates, screws. Cook frowned. Jessica shouldn't be using psychokinesis to control the solid. Oh, magnetization? I see. But if that's all, Bang! Suddenly, there was a loud bang. The explosion happened next to Cook. It came from the console of the command room. It turned out that the real purpose of Jessica's electric arc was to detonate the instrument here. The flame was burning. Cook walked out slowly from the burning flames. However, Jessica was nowhere to be seen. She might have chosen the route to retreat at the moment of the explosion. At this moment, Cook's hand suddenly shot out like lightning. He reached out and caught a screw that was shot at his face. He suddenly smiled. Not bad battle awareness. At the same time, Cook's communication device rang. Mr. Cook, how's the situation in the base? Have you found the intruders? Cook glanced at the man whose head was blown up in the explosion, saying indifferently, We're late. The intruders seem to have left after killing the head of the branch. Okay, I got it. But the intruders shouldn't have left for a long time. The follow-up troops will arrive soon. We'll conduct a comprehensive search. Mr. Cook, please go to the outside of the base. I'll pick you up. No need, I'll see if there are any other clues here. Cook said, and then turned off the communication device. After saying that, Cook walked to the man who was caught and interrogated by Jessica at the beginning but unfortunately died in the explosion. He should be the head of this branch. Cook squatted down at this time, then stretched out his hand to open the man's eyes, and directly dug out the man's left eyeball. In the forest, a figure was staggering forward. The power of the explosion was neither too big nor too small, but it made Jessica extremely embarrassed. The clothes on her back had been destroyed, and the sleeve on her left arm had disappeared. The night was boundless, but there were light beams flashing through the forest from time to time. It might be the people sent by the Union to hunt her down. At this moment, Jessica felt a splitting headache, which should be caused by the excessive use of her ability during the battle with Cook. Her vision was getting blurry, and her body was getting weaker and weaker. She did not even know if she could escape from this hunt. Could it be that she could not return to Paradise Island and take her revenge on Paradise Island? Jessica finally fell down under the roots of a big tree. She turned over with difficulty and then opened her clothes. There was a sharp iron piece inserted into her abdomen. It was inserted into her body during the explosion. Jessica held one end of the iron piece with her trembling hand. It was inserted too deep. She shouldn't pull it out directly without a tool to stop the bleeding. However, even if she chose to leave it alone, the wound would still bleed incessantly. Jessica sat up abruptly and took several deep breaths. Then she picked up a branch from the ground and bit it in her mouth. At this moment, she quickly clenched her fists a few times. Then, along with her breathing, she abruptly pulled out the piece of metal from her abdomen. At this moment, the branch was directly bitten off by her, but it wasn't over yet. At this moment, Jessica used her remaining strength to press her hands on the wound on her abdomen. Then, electric light flashed, she breathed more rapidly, and the pain almost suffocated her. Although this cruel method stopped the bleeding, it also consumed all her strength at the same time. At this moment, it was extremely difficult for her to crawl on the ground, let alone stand up. She could only resign herself to fate and hope that the person who was chasing her would be careless. "You're quite tenacious." Suddenly, a pleasant voice could be heard. What surprised Jessica wasn't the sudden voice, but the person who spoke was speaking the native language of Yian's country. Why was there a guy from that country in this place? Jessica opened her eyes reluctantly. she saw a petite figure who seemed to be a little girl. Oh, you can understand my words? The little girl squatted down in front of Jessica. This seems to be a branch base of that shabby club. Did you destroy it? Jessica answered with ease. Why did you destroy it? Do you have a grudge against them? The little girl suddenly asked. Revenge, Jessica said weakly. Revenge. What a coincidence. The little girl suddenly laughed in a low voice. I have some debts to settle with this shabby club. Thanks to them, I've been poisoned quite heavily. Hey, I don't think you'll be able to make it out alive like this. Why don't I give you a hand? It just so happens that I'm a bit hungry. You. Jessica moved her lips. However, this little girl suddenly bent down. Jessica felt a tingling sensation on her neck. But strangely, this reaction offset the pain from the wound on her abdomen. She even felt a strange numbness which made her moan softly. Who are you? Remember the person who granted you immortality? Susie Jewin. Sue! Jessica's lips moved, but she lost consciousness at last. The moonlight suddenly flashed, dispersing the shadows of the trees in the forest. The little girl raised her head, her red pupils suddenly widened. She wiped the bloodstain on her lips and looked at Jessica's face. You're a good kid. Found her, she's here. All of a sudden, dozens of lights flew towards the tree at the same speed. There seemed to be a light curtain around the tree, with shadows everywhere. There's another one. Is she an accomplice? Little girl? Whatever, take them back together. The little girl suddenly stood up and sneered. Let's collect some interest first. Something suddenly startled the sleeping birds in the forest, causing them to rush out of the forest and fly into the night sky. Far away, Cuck looked at the direction of the forest with doubt. He just frowned and didn't intend to check it out. He was now in a secret room in the base. Basically, there was such a place in every branch. It was a place for the head of each branch to communicate with the people on Paradise Island. At the same time, it was also a place where the network host of the base was located. The elevator was about 15 meters deep underground. When Cuck walked out of the elevator, the space in front of him wasn't big, only about 20 to 30 square meters. At this time, Cook walked to a huge console and quickly entered a series of instructions on the control board. Soon after, a small scanning plate suddenly opened on the side. Cuck took out the fresh eyeball that was dug out from the left eye of the branch chief and placed it in front of the scanner. The authentication password has been scanned correctly. The interface on the screen instantly explained. Cook sat in front of the console, his hands on the keyboard, and kept typing out a series of instructions. Connected to the main system of Paradise Island. The access party is the agent of the branch 019. The authority is 3. You can view the documents below level 3. You can upgrade the authority to view the higher level confidential document. Cuck calmly took out a palm-sized crystal card. There were many circuit board-like patterns on the crystal card and an Arabic number 7 was engraved on it. At this time, Cook inserted the crystal card into a slot on the console. Authority upgrade. Authority upgrade successful. From the authority of the 7th Godly General Tyrant, you can now view all the confidential documents below level 7. Cuck frowned and took out the same crystal card again, but the number 5 was engraved on it. New authorization detected. From the authority of the 5th Godly General Magic Spear, you can now view all the confidential documents below level 7. Looking at the words on the screen, Cuck finally shook his head. Is the authorization of 2 godly generals not enough? Without any hesitation, Cuck quickly took out the 2 crystal cards and left the place. When he returned from the underground, he received news of the death of more than a dozen members of the search team. The state of death of these people was very strange. It was as if someone had installed a bomb in their bodies, causing them to explode. Only a pile of minced meat was found at the scene. As for who the murderer was, they did not find out. Not long after, Cuck received an order from the 26th seat of Paradise Island, asking him to return to Paradise Island immediately. The reason was, a highly intelligent Prometheus was found in the land of Romania. Firecrackers, fireworks, traditional gongs, and a lion dance team. In front of the Chamber of Commerce building in Zhonghua Street, it was in full swing with many people gathered. Some of them were local residents of Zhonghua Street, while others were foreign reporters. Today was not a special festival, but the reason why Zhonghua Street was so lively was because Old Master Song felt that there had been too much bad luck recently, so he simply held a big banquet here and invited almost all the old neighbors. The old master of the Song family, Song Tianyu, had not appeared in Zhonghua Street for a long time. This sudden news immediately attracted many people, especially some of the older seniors who lived in Zhonghua Street. They used to be able to exchange a few words with old Song. Now that they had not seen each other for many years, it was natural that they were excited. Today, I want to announce two things. Song Tianyu looked at the people in front of the microphone and smiled. First, the president of the Chamber of Commerce, Bai Shuitang, has resigned from his position because he is not feeling well. We will choose a new president and he will meet you soon. After a pause, Old Song continued, as for the second thing, the life gate of the Chamber of Commerce will be cancelled from now on. Hearing this, everyone was in an uproar. Chapter 954. When Master Song said that the Gate of Life would be cancelled, someone immediately began to weld the Gate of Life behind the Chamber of Commerce building with tools. Song Tianyu announced the opening of the Gate of Life on the day of the establishment of the Zhonghua Street Chamber of Commerce, and now he personally announced the cancellation. As the actual owner of Zhonghua Street, he had such power. In front of the Chamber of Commerce, the faces of the crowd that had gathered there turned ugly. Although the Gate of Life was very different from before, its existence was still the fastest way for some people to solve their problems. For example, even if they borrowed money from the Gate of Life, they began to calculate the interest, but at least the interest was much lower than the outside loan, and the threshold was not as high as the bank. In this way, the Gate of Life no longer needed help for free, but at least it was within the scope of the residents' tolerance. Therefore, although there were changes to the Gate of Life, many people silently accepted it. In particular, the president of the Chamber of Commerce was Bai Shuitang, who was the in-law of the Song family. In the eyes of the residents of Zhonghua Street, he represented the Song family. It could be said that Bai Shuitang was actually very smart. He figured out where the bottom line of these people's acceptance was, so he changed the nature of the Gate of Life little by little, and successfully conspired under the nose of the Song family. There were many reasons for Bai Shuitang's success. On one hand, the focus of the Song family was not originally on Zhonghua Street. Zhonghua Street was just created by Song Tianyu on a whim. On the other hand, since Song Ying took over the Song dynasty group, her view of Zhonghua Street was somewhat different from Song Tianyu's. Song Ying did not agree with such an approach, thinking that it would only create the laziness of the new generation of residents of Zhonghua Street. Bai Shuitang was able to operate this kind of deceiving thing for such a long time because he understood Song Ying's mind. It was just that this time, Song Haoren came to Zhonghua Street with Luoqiu, letting Song Haoren see some of the depression of Zhonghua Street, which made Song Haoren suddenly have the idea of picking up Zhonghua Street again. Although the Gate of Life has been cancelled, in its place, the Chamber of Commerce of Zhonghua Street will set up a special department. Song Tianyu patted the microphone in front of him. The new department will replace the original function of the Gate of Life. At the same time, this department will examine and evaluate the qualifications of those who seek help. We will inherit the meaning of the Gate of Life in a more fair and open manner. Just as old Master Song finished speaking, the surrounding atmosphere was clearly different. But after announcing these two things, Song Tianyu left the stage and returned to the Chamber of Commerce with Uncle Wu. Of course, at this time, someone replaced Song Tianyu to speak. It was an employee of the Public Relations Department of the Song Dynasty Group. Now, let me explain the specific details of this special department to everyone, as well as the recruitment criteria of this department. The public relations staff looked at everyone with a smile. Recruitment? What do you mean? Could it be that the employees of this department can be selected from us? The microphone rang again, and the employee from the public relations department said with a smile on his face, "Just as you think, this department will be recruiting from among you. At the same time, there will be internal supervision from the company. The specific situation is like this." The voice of the explanation gradually decreased. Song Tianyu, who was already in the Chamber of Commerce, silently watched the welding of the Gate of Life. When the last part was welded, Song Tianyu suddenly smiled. "Isn't it like the end of an era?" Uncle Wu also smiled, "But it's also the arrival of a new era." Through the blinds on the window glass, Luochio was watching the speech downstairs of the Chamber of Commerce building. At this time, Song Haoran came to Luochio with a wine glass in his hands. In recent days, eldest young Master Song, who was dressed as a CEO, was slightly different from before. He seemed to have become more serious. Luochio quietly glanced at Song Haoran's chest, and then reached out to take Song Haoran's kindness. "Are you very interested in this kind of scene?" Song Haoran also opened the blinds and glanced at the situation downstairs. "More or less with some expectation," Luochio said softly. "People are probably more quiet when it comes to this kind of thing. Something like uneasiness or gradually waking up from some kind of numbness. Shouldn't it be sad?" Song Haoran seemed to have a different opinion. He said indifferently, "Whether it's the Gate of Life or the new department, they always want to entrust themselves to someone." Luochio just smiled. Song Haoran liked Luochio's smile very much. It was very pure, as if this simple smile could sweep away the irritation in people's hearts. Song Haoran shook his head. "Well, in the end, there is still a possibility for things to change for the better. We can't ask for everything to change completely all of a sudden, right?" Luochio smiled and took a sip of the wine in the glass, and then said in surprise, "This is grape juice." Song Haoran blinked and said, "It's working hours now, you can't drink. Otherwise, you'll be scolded to death by Song Ying." But in fact, Song Ying was not here. She was in Bai Shuitang's office, tidying up some of Bai Shuitang's belongings. The Song family did not announce Bai Shuitang's death, only that he resigned because he was unwell. And before the official chairman of the Chamber of Commerce was appointed, Song Ying's original secretary, Su Mei, would temporarily act as the chairman. And at this time, as if it was agreed, the moment Song Haoran mentioned Song Ying, the door of the room was knocked. Song Ying pushed the door and entered. She frowned when she saw the two people in the room, who seemed to be particularly idle. "This is grape juice," Song Haoran said with a smile. Song Ying rolled her eyes at him and walked in. Song Haoran said flatteringly, "Xiao Ying is also very beautiful today. She has a very charming temperament. Maybe you can wear more black clothes." Suddenly there's a sense of mystery. Song Haoran suddenly put his hand on Luochio's shoulder. His originally serious temperament suddenly disappeared without a trace. He said with a mischievous smile, "Luochio, am I right? It's a pity this is my niece, otherwise I would also want to hit on her." Song Ying was indeed wearing a black dress that was rarely seen today. She lacked her usual liveliness, but there was an additional sense of solemnity. "Song Haoran, your ghost uncle." Song Haoran destroyed his own seriousness and Song Ying's solemnity at the same time. Song Ying waved her hand and threw a makeup mirror over. Luochio always liked to watch them fight. At this time, he smiled slightly. "Can I go down for a walk?" Luochio suddenly interrupted. This made Song Haoran and Song Ying, who were about to enter the fight, stop and look at Luochio at the same time. Luochio said, "I suddenly want to go down for a walk. Aren't we leaving the day after tomorrow? I don't know when I can come again." "Oh, that's not a problem," Song Ying said subconsciously, "but Grandpa said it's almost time to eat." Today, he seems to have booked a table at an old restaurant. How about we go for a walk after eating? It's okay, I'll go before eating. Luocio smiled and walked out the door. I'll let Song San accompany you. Song Haoran suddenly said. I should be fine by myself. Luocio shook his head and said, If Mr. Song San follows me, won't it be more conspicuous? Okay, you keep an eye on the time. Song Haoran nodded. If there's anything, call me or Xiaoying. Uncle. Song Ying still frowned. When the Song family went in and out, safety was a very important issue. She didn't agree with Song Haoran's thoughtlessness. Unexpectedly, Song Haoran smiled at this time and said, Luocio, it shouldn't be a problem for you to tell me about your feelings. You're too. Song Ying rubbed her forehead. Okay, since you say so. Her uncle was also a person with strong luck. The so-called feelings he often talked about would even come true many times. This had almost become an unsolved mystery in the village. But it can't be too long. At most, it can only be an hour, understand? Song Ying said to Luocio seriously at this time. Luocio nodded and looked at Song Ying. He didn't hide it at all, which made Song Ying's pupils shrink. Is there anything else? Nothing. Luocio chuckled and said, I just think you're dressed very beautifully today. Is this it? Song Ying snorted softly. Then I'll go first. Tell Master Song later. Luocio went out and closed the door after saying goodbye. Song Haoran's eyes seemed to be curved at this time. Is it, Humph? It seems that unknowingly, our Song family's food chain seems to have been reorganized. Song, how ran? Luocio strolled alone on the street with a classic Hasselblad camera. In the eyes of outsiders, this was just the appearance of a foreign traveler, which didn't attract too much attention. Luocio still enjoyed this kind of leisurely time. It was like returning to the time before he came in contact with the club. But at that time, he didn't have this camera in his hand. Since when did he have the idea of photographing some moments? Was it because he felt that even if it was stored in his memory, it wasn't enough? The camera moved habitually, from the street to the end, and finally the perspective changed. A tall and sturdy figure entered the camera. Luocio's eyes moved away from the camera and directly looked over. The figure he saw belonged to Songda. At this time, Songda was walking into an alley. Luocio's eyes moved again, and saw a photo next to the alley. Tea house. At this time, in the back alley of the tea house, Songda was slowly approaching with light footsteps, Miss Yuna who was feeding the stray cats in the back alley. But in the end, Yuna still noticed. Songda scratched his head a little embarrassedly, and his eyes became a little flickering. Yuna wanted to stand up at this time, but she seemed to have lost her balance because of her physical discomfort. Songda saw this and hurriedly rushed forward to support her. They seemed to be talking about something and started to smile at each other. They were talking and laughing about some unknown topic. It probably started from the stray cats here. Click. Under the control of Luocio's fingers, the Hasselblad camera naturally recorded this scene. What a beautiful soul. Master, don't you plan to take action? This was a voice that Luocio was familiar with. It suddenly appeared behind him. But Luocio didn't turn around and just fiddled with the focus of the camera. Actually, this is quite good. Luocio closed one eye and opened the other eye, and the open eye was on the camera. Not everything is good when you have it in your hands. Maybe if you keep some and let it be natural, it will be a little more balanced. In fact, in many cases, even if there are no external factors to trigger it, the possibilities that exist in them will still emerge. Suddenly, there was silence behind Luocio. He turned around a little strangely, and saw Yu Yi looking at him with gentle eyes. Luocio was stunned, and then said softly, I gave myself a break for a reason, and now it seems to be working well. Have I become more talkative, and you are not used to it? Yu Yi shook her head. No, I just feel that I like Master more this way. Really? Luocio smiled, and then the camera was aimed at Yu Yi, pressing the shutter, and then said apologetically, Although there is a suspicion of a sneak attack, I really can't help taking action. But Yu Yi, it's not a problem, because I can't find any blind spots for you. It's rare to come here. Yu Yi suddenly said, Master, can you take me for a walk? Luoqiu opened his mouth slightly in surprise. Can't I? Yu Ye's voice was a little soft. Of course not. Luoqiu nodded. This seemed to be the first time that Yu Yi took the initiative to make a request. Then let's walk and report at the same time, what do you think? Okay. Nevertheless, in the following time walking along Zhonghua Street, the two almost didn't talk about any problems about the club's business. Instead, they were completely like a pair of tourists traveling together. And the so-called report only started in the last 5 minutes. Summoning spirit. Skaha? Luoqiu glanced at Yu Yi with some surprise. At this time, the two were sitting in a small park on Zhonghua Street. The servant girl was holding a cotton candy in her hand. At this time, she was tearing off a piece and putting it into her mouth. This kind of Chinese specialty snack was just bought in front of the park. It was a very simple thing, but it was made of white sugar melted into silk like a white cloud. Probably a means of self-protection. Yu Yi nodded. Her Majesty the Queen seems to have encountered some trouble after that. Judging from the current situation, it's like a comedy monkey in a circus that's chained up. It's really a terrible situation. Luoqiu thought for a while, but this Queen of Shadow Country, have you heard about her? I met her about buying seasonings. Yu Yi smiled and said, she is a very intelligent and general existence. If it is Master, he should be happy to meet her. If you say so, I am a little interested. Luoqiu nodded. But, Yu Yi suddenly said, although Lucifer's rank as the Queen of Hell is very high, and it is more than enough to summon Skaha, in her current situation, it is still a bit unbelievable that she can summon Skaha. Oh, why do you say that? It's probably because of the summoning itself that the one being summoned has some kind of will, that's why it saw the opportunity, and responded in the ancient contract, yen. Chapter 955. Thinking about the servant girl's words, Luoqiu said after a moment of silence, you mean, she has been waiting for a chance to come? Yu Yi nodded. After all, Skaha is the top summoning spirit. For people in this era, the probability of successfully summoning her is infinitely close to 0. Well, Skaha. Luoqiu frowned. When I was looking through the old account book, I seem to have seen some information about her. Let's leave it at that. I'll check it after I go back. Okay. The servant girl had no objection to the master's decision. The club was not an enemy of any party, and was completely independent. Therefore, it was entirely up to the club boss to decide whether to pay attention to the affairs of a certain powerful individual. Anything else? Luoqiu looked at the time. It was almost time to meet with the Song family. Yu Yi said, the shop has been cleaned up. If Master has no other orders, I'll move out after I leave. I've found several new addresses, waiting for Master's decision. As long as it's close to my destination. Luoqiu shook his head. It's up to you. Yu Yi nodded, but suddenly grabbed Luoqiu's palm and put it on her forehead, saying softly, Yu Yi will be away for 2 days. I'm sorry that I can't pay attention to Master all the time. Although external forces can't eliminate your existence, the pain of death will still be left. She raised her head and looked at Luoqiu with gentle eyes. Yu Yi doesn't want Master to be in pain when his body dies and then resurrects in the shop. So please be careful, okay? It's not possible to kill me now. Luoqiu smiled. And it's only for 2 days. It shouldn't be a big problem. My luck shouldn't be that bad. Moreover, it only killed his body, but couldn't eliminate his existence. Logically speaking, based on the old nanny's condition, she should stay in the hospital. But the old nanny insisted on leaving, saying that she didn't want to waste too much of the church's funds because of her. Although the priest had repeatedly said that he didn't care about this, he couldn't change the old nanny's insistence. Therefore, Shalti and her group were quickly sent to a house of the church, which was equivalent to the staff's dormitory. There were also a few young nuns from the church living with him, as well as a reverend mother in her 40s. This nanny was also the teacher of the young nuns. Lucifer naturally lived with the old nanny and Shalty. For this reason, the Queen of Hell kept mocking the magic of fate on the way. Letting her live in the nuns' house was like letting a wolf into a flock of sheep. However, since Mr. Esam's death, Shalty had become much quieter. She did not react much to Lucifer's sarcasm from time to time. Most of the time, she just looked at the Queen of Hell expressionlessly. But on the other hand, the change in Shalty's eyes aroused Lucifer's interest more and more. "I'm really looking forward to the moment when this bright gaze is dyed black. What a wicked interest." The first sentence was suddenly said by Lucifer, who was lying on the ground. The second sentence was answered by the Queen of Film Country, who was watching television. The old nanny needed to rest and stayed in her room, while Shalty went directly to attend the nuns' classes. So, Lucifer could only be grounded and stay in Shalty's room. "You also hope that I can recover my strength as soon as possible to provide resources for your existence, right?" Lucifer didn't turn his head at this time. Instead, he was lying on the ground and drawing something. "Thank you very much." Skaha also responded indifferently. The target of protection was actually one of the kings of hell. This was probably the easiest summon she had ever been. Originally, there wasn't much reason to fight in this world, and there was no need to fight with other summoned spirits. Speaking of which, can you get power from food? Lucifer suddenly asked curiously. Because before this, Skaha had already eaten a lot of things. These were all things that Skaha took from the kitchen. At this moment, she was still eating dried meat. Better than nothing. Skaha looked at Lucifer and found that he had stood up. In other words, she was already standing in the middle of a formation that was about 1 meter in diameter. The materials used to draw this formation were all gathered from nearby places, especially the ink used to draw it. It was ground from bones that were more than 10 years old and mixed with other materials to make it. Of course, these materials naturally couldn't be found by Lucifer himself. Skaha shook her head secretly. If her former opponents knew that the first thing she did after being summoned this time was to dig a grave, they would probably make fun of her. "Is it done? What's this?" But she was still curious about Lucifer's intention of finding these materials. Lucifer said indifferently, "Nothing. After summoning you last time, there was still a bit of death chi left, so I planned to use it to find my former subordinate. They were originally in this city, but when I came back this time, I found that they were gone. But it seems that I still can't find them." The formation under Lucifer's feet flickered a few times, and then completely dimmed. Lucifer shook his head. "It seems that they are very far away from me. Where did they go, my lovely Charlotte? If there's nothing else, please allow me to leave, respected summoner," Skaha suddenly said at this moment. Lucifer said, "Wait, there's something I need you to investigate." Skaha stayed and made an expression of listening. Lucifer said, "Help me investigate the Church of Bucky. I heard that the messenger of God of this church never shows his true face to others." "Okay." Skaha nodded. It was really a summoning that would be ridiculed. The Queen of the Shadow Kingdom sighed and suddenly said before leaving, "Respected summoner, if possible, please put on your clothes. According to the ethics of this society, it is easier for you to cause unnecessary trouble like this." Lucifer looked at himself in astonishment. Although this house was provided by the church, it was actually a bit simple. For example, there was no air conditioner. In the stuffy room, in order to cool down, Lucifer simply wore a small vest and blue and white striped underwear. Nothing more. "Is it a crime?" Lucifer suddenly smiled strangely. "I'm looking forward to it, if there is such a perverted and twisted guy." Skaha sighed again, and then his body passed through the wall of the room and left completely. The philanthropist Mr. Saint Frank was recently active in the social circle of Rio. Monsieur de Saint Fran's history was soon made familiar to all, and many were eager to make acquaintance with this man of unimaginable wealth and benevolence. And Mr. St. Frank himself was very happy to make friends with people who visited him, so it didn't take long for Mr. St. Frank's private appointments to be full. Tonight was the 20th birthday party of Mr. St. Frank's daughter, Miss Cosney. Outside the hotel that had been booked early, the guests' vehicles were already packed. At this time, in the lounge on the upper floor of the hotel, Mr. St. Frank was listening to his personal assistant's report on the arrival of the guests. "That's basically it, sir. There's one more thing, that is, the mayor's secretary called and said that the mayor might arrive later because he had an impromptu meeting in the afternoon and it hasn't ended yet." Mr. St. Frank quickly ordered, "You tell the mayor's secretary that I will meet him at the door in person." "Okay, I'll reply right away." The personal assistant nodded quickly and then walked out of the door. As soon as the personal assistant left, Miss Cosney came out from the other side of the door. This was the door of the dressing room in the lounge. At this time, Miss Cosney came out slowly in a white dress embroidered with gold. Mr. St. Frank looked at her and nodded with satisfaction. He said with a smile, "My dear, you really know how to charm men." Then Monsieur St. Frank picked up a box from the tea table and walked over to Cosney. There was a necklace in the box. Mr. St. Frank put the necklace on Cosney himself. In front of the mirror, after putting the necklace on Cosney, Mr. St. Frank reached out and grabbed her chin, facing the mirror. At the same time, he looked at his and Cosney's reflection in the mirror. "Look, you're really a perfect work of art. Do you know why I adopted you from the orphanage? It's because of your eyes." Cosney frowned a little, for M. de St. Frank held her chin and neck with a little too much force. "Do you know your task tonight?" Mr. St. Frank suddenly asked. "My goal is to get something from the oracle," Cosney said quickly. Mr. St. Frank laughed strangely. "What a good kid. When you succeed in getting the thing, I'll give you a good reward." "Dad." Cosney's eyes suddenly became unfocused, and her breathing became rapid. At the same time, her face became pale. She seemed to have lost all her strength, and could only lean on Monsieur St. Frank. "Oh, it's time again." Mr. St. Frank laughed strangely again, but at the same time, he let go of Cosney. As soon as he let go of Cosney, she collapsed on the ground. "Dad, wait," St. Fran said casually. Then he turned and walked into another door in the lounge. Soon after, he came out with a box. This time, the box didn't contain jewelry, but a syringe and a small bottle of powder. Mr. St. Frank narrowed his eyes and began to dissolve the powder in the bottle and put it into the syringe. Drug addiction was a very good means of controlling people. This was a very effective experience that Mr. St. Frank, Brother Ming, taught him in the early years when he was still in the Imperial headquarters. "Dad, I'm suffering. Dad, give me. Dad, oh my dear, don't worry, I'll make you happy soon." Mr. St. Frank chuckled, and then turned over Cosney's arm. After a few gentle flicks of the syringe, the needle was directly inserted into Cosney's body. Cosney was still gasping for breath, but the symptoms soon calmed down. At this time, Cosney's eyes were half closed, and her expression gradually became strange. She seemed to be suffering, but also seemed to be laughing. As for Mr. St. Frank, he put away the syringe, then sat down, smoking a cigar and drinking wine, and looked at Cosney's appearance at this time. About 15 minutes later, Cosney suddenly opened her eyes completely. She glanced around and grabbed her skirt with her hand. She grabbed it very, very hard. But Mr. St. Frank didn't see it. Seeing that Cosney had woken up, he said indifferently, "Go and touch up your makeup. Greet this so-called messenger of God with your best face, and try to meet his requirements as much as possible. I'll give you a chance to make it." Cosney nodded and turned to walk into the fitting room. When she turned back to Mr. St. Frank, she bit the inside of her lips hard, and her eyes became dimmer. At this time, the personal secretary knocked on the door and came in. "Sir, Mr. Besson, whom you asked me to pay special attention to, has arrived." As you said, he did come with a masked friend. I've led them to the banquet hall. Very good, I'll be right there. Mr. St. Frank nodded. Mr. Besson thought that this was a good place to publicize the greatness of Bucky, because he kindly suggested to the messenger of God that he respected and worshipped. In short, he could show off his skills here. In general, Bucky was a person who would accept the suggestions of his subordinate. He felt that Mr. Besson's suggestion was very good, so he immediately cast a blessing spell on a believer who had already joined the Buggy Church. Apart from that, he also found a local official who had yet to join the church but was still suspicious of the church and cast a blessing spell on him as well. The effect of the scene was very obvious, especially for those who had already joined the church and were also guests of this banquet. Many people had contacted Mr. Besson privately, hoping to communicate with him about the church in detail. Buggy was naturally happy to see this happen. He was happily calculating how many additional units of faith he could gain every day after this wave of show. He found that there was a special function on the club pad that Miss Maid gave him. That was, he could spin the lottery roulette once at the cost of 100 faith units each time. The things on the roulette were all excellent. If he could win it, it would be a great deal. Well, should I directly draw 10 times in a row? Bucky rubbed his chin at this moment and muttered, "It's a pity that there is no guarantee for 10 times in a row. It's too evil." Bucky, who was thinking about how to draw 10 times in a row, didn't know that there was a pair of eyes in the banquet hall at this moment, watching his every move. The source of the sight was a woman leaning against the wall, but the people around her didn't seem to notice her existence. The Queen of Shadow Kingdom, Skaha. It's not a trick. The Queen of Shadow Kingdom narrowed her eyes. It seems that he is still collecting faith. Interesting. Yin 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 yin. Chapter 956. Messenger and Mr. Besson. Mr. Franco appeared in front of Buggy in an elegant manner. It's an honor for you to come to my daughter's birthday party. When had Buggy ever seen Brother Ming act so respectfully? At this time, he was secretly happy, but he was thinking about how to make this old man keep this attitude tonight. Thinking that Brother Ming would kneel down in front of him every day under his theurgy, Buggy couldn't help but feel a little excited. I have nothing to do. Buggy smiled. It's rare for Mr. Franco to invite me, isn't it? Besides, my God has always taught me not to refuse the kindness of others. Haha, I hope I can listen to your teachings in the future. I believe I will be able to avoid many detours on the road of life. Mr. Franco's face was also full of joy. But at the same time, he was also sizing up the guests of the birthday banquet tonight. It was obvious that among these guests, many of them did not feel that the appearance of this God's emissary was abrupt at all. Instead, they were very happy. These people were obviously believers. Perhaps they were people who were about to become believers. Quietly, this new church had attracted so many influential and rich people, which surprised Mr. St. Frank. He did not believe that Bucky, a lazy guy who relied on luck to get to where he was, would have the talent to develop this new church. However, the name of this new church always made Mr. San Francesco feel a little uncomfortable. Was it a coincidence or something else? It's rare for Mr. Franco to have such an idea. Mr. Besson was very witty at this time. In fact, we have been editing the new doctrine recently, and the first version will be printed soon. If Mr. Franco is interested, I will send it to you as soon as possible. It's my pleasure. Mr. Franco smiled. Just then, the St. Frank's secretary came up to him and whispered something to him. Mr. Franco nodded, then looked at the messenger of God apologetically and said, "Messenger, I'm really sorry, but the mayor will be here soon. I have to go and greet him. How about this? I'll let my daughter come and greet you. I hope that she will be able to comprehend something under your inspiration, envoy." Sure. Buggy agreed without hesitation. This old man was planning to give his daughter away. Unfortunately, Buggy had been dealing with Brother Ming for more than 10 years, so he was very clear about this guy's routine. How could this guy give birth to such a beautiful daughter? Was he cuckolded? Bucky guessed, kindly in his heart while thinking about what kind of means he would use when Brother Ming's daughter appeared later. To be honest, Bucky felt that he was not interested in women recently. On one hand, it might be because there were too many outstanding female believers in his church, so he was a little numb in this aspect. On the other hand, it was probably because he was in love. "Emissary, please follow me." De Saint Franc's secretary now approached Bucky respectfully and made a gesture of invitation. To Bucky's surprise, Besson did not follow him. As the first fanatical believer, this guy almost always wanted to stay by his side. He did not know that this fanatical believer had already known about the interest of the messenger of God. At this time, he had already smelled Mr. Franco's intention and saw that the messenger was very interested. How would he dare to disturb the supreme messenger of God? De Saint Franc's secretary was now in front of a hotel suite. He opened the door for Bucky and let Bucky go in alone. Bucky, who had recently strengthened his muscles and learned the charm spell, was very calm at this time. He put his hands behind his back and walked into the room with a smile on his face. After he entered the room, the secretary outside the door sensibly closed the door gently. This should be one of the luxury suites on the top floor of the hotel, and it was a duplex structure. At this time, a woman stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, looking at the neon lights in the city. Bucky recalled the appearance of this Miss Cosini. Looking at her almost perfect back at this time, his heart was a little hot. He was not interested in women, but if he met the best, it was still difficult to suppress the instinctive impulse. In general, it could be described as becoming picky. The footsteps were approaching, but Miss Cosini did not look back. Even when Bucky walked to the position next to her and looked at the scenery outside, she still did not look back. Bucky was a veteran in the field of flowers. From the lowest level of prostitutes to the bright stars outside, he had tried them all. If his romantic history was edited into a book, it could probably be serialized into hundreds of chapters. He knew that Miss Cosini's ignorance meant to loosen the reins only to grasp them better. "Little girl, look at the lights. What do you see?" Bucky suddenly asked softly at this time. Perhaps it was because he had been a charlatan for a long time recently. When Bucky said this, even he himself felt that he was a charlatan. At this time, Miss Cosini still didn't look at this God's emissary. She just said indifferently, "All living things in this world are either pursued by others or pursued by others. They are either busy or exhausted." After hearing this, Bucky did not answer. He just looked out of the window silently. He was suddenly a little confused. He did not know why Brother Ming's daughter suddenly sighed like this. Miss Cosini. But Bucky had eaten a lot of salt. After thinking quickly, he said, "All living things are tired, but there are always a small number of people who can get lucky. Miss Cosini, you are the daughter of Mr. San Fran. You don't have to worry about food and clothing. It seems that you should not sigh like this. Do you think it's a pleasure to live in a wealthy family?" Miss Cosini's gaze slowly shifted. "It's just much more comfortable than the children of poor families." Bucky said indifferently, "Maybe what you are tired of is what others want to get. What you despise is not outdated. You have long been accustomed to it and feel that it is not a big deal. But you don't know that in the eyes of some people, this is an act of not knowing how to cherish." Miss Cosini looked at Bucky at this time and said seriously, "Since you are God's messenger and are loved by many believers, it must be because your wisdom can convince them. I want to ask you a question, may I?" "I don't know everything." Bucky shook his head and said, "The omniscient and omnipotent is the God I believe in, not me, a humble believer." "Can you save me?" said Miss Cosini suddenly. Bucky did not react for a moment and said in surprise, "Save you? Miss Cosini, I don't feel that you are in danger." Miss Cosine looked sad at this time and looked out of the window again. What you see is that I grew up in a rich family and had a superior growth environment. I am the daughter of Mr. St. Francis, a great philanthropist. But you don't know that I was originally an orphan without parents and was just adopted. I knew it. Brother Ming was a celibate. How could he have such a lovely biological daughter? So he did not doubt Cosine's confession at all. Even so, the god of luck has quietly come to your side, hasn't it? Bucky chuckled and said, being adopted is a good thing, especially Mr. St. Francis is a good man. Probably. Miss Cosine was silent for a long time, and then suddenly reached out and touched the glass window in front of her. Her fingers slightly grasped it. Careful care, provision of any material, and even the future path has been planned. What else is there to be unsatisfied with? There should be no more. Bucky nodded. But what if this man raped me when I was 14 years old? Cosine's words caught Bucky off guard. This is impossible? Bucky couldn't close his mouth. As far as he knew, Brother Ming wasn't into this. As for himself, he would occasionally play a similar game, but it was only in the form of a game to slightly experience this kind of unconventional feeling. How can such a beautiful work of art be tarnished by others? Miss Cosine looked at Bucky sadly at this time. Instead of being tarnished by others in the future, let me destroy it with my own hands. My father said so at that time. I will never forget that day. A man who gave me everything, appeared in front of me like an angel, took me away from the cold orphanage, and gave me a superior life, suddenly showed his fangs like a demon, tearing my clothes and gnawing at me. Bucky was silent for a moment, then frowned and said, Miss Cosine, why are you telling me this? This should be the last thing you want others to know, right? Miss Cosine showed a sad smile. Do you think I'm deceiving you? Bucky shook his head subconsciously. It doesn't seem necessary, but it's a little hard to accept. Well, people have two sides. Mr. St. Francis may really be a well-dressed person on the outside, but his inner strength has been corrupted. But why are you telling me this? I hope you can save me. Miss Cosine stared at Bucky at this time. My father, Mr. St. Francis, is a hypocrite. The purpose of doing charity is just to make himself more famous. His purpose is to win enough people's support so that he can smoothly participate in the next presidential election. F***CK. Brother Ming has an idea. He wants to do something. From a vicious thug to the head of a country. Only a lunatic like him would dare to think of such a thing. Only you. Miss Cosine suddenly grabbed Bucky's hand at this time. Only you can save me from my father's evil clutches. Because he needs you very much, he hopes to get your help, waiting for the support of most influential people behind your emerging church. If he has your support, then he will be a big step closer to his goal. So? Bucky suddenly understood the woman's meaning. As long as you tell my father that you like me. Miss Cosine directly put Bucky's hand on her chest at this time, and said delicately, then, in order to please you, my father will not hesitate to agree to your request. Because in his eyes, I'm just a toy for him to play with. If this toy can play its greatest value, my father will be very happy, and then give me to him with both hands. Tonight, this is what I meant. Ahem. Bucky pulled his hand back at this time. Miss Cosine, please respect yourself. I'm a very serious person. No. Can I? Miss Cosine's gaze softened. I've been waiting for someone to appear. I've been waiting for someone who can bring me out of my father's nightmare. I swore, if such a person exists, I'll use the rest of my life to repay him. With that, Miss Cosine put her hand behind her back and began to unzip the pure white dress with gold embroidery. Her hands opened the shoulders of the dress, letting the dress slide down at once. At this time, Cosine covered her chest with her hands and lowered her head slightly, although this body is not defiled. But after all, it's only my father. Isn't it attractive to you at all? Bucky swallowed his saliva secretly. Don't defile his adopted daughter, the girl waiting to be saved, which made him very excited. He had never met someone with such attributes before. But, looking at Miss Cosine, who seemed to be fine with anything, Bucky instantly suppressed the lust in his heart and suddenly opened his palm. His palm exuded a strange light. Cosine looked at it subconsciously, and her eyes instantly became a little scattered, and then became empty. Then, Cosine stood rooted to the ground like a puppet. Bucky sighed at this time. He had just used charm on this woman to make her stop. At this time, Bucky held his hands, lowered his head, and frowned, looking like he was deep in thought. Don't worry, Bucky. Think about it carefully. Is Brother Ming really a scumbag to this extent? Bucky glanced at Cosine, who was bare-chested at this time. Bucky, there's nothing wrong with being careful. Bucky glanced at Cosine, who was now bare-chested. Bucky, what kind of woman have you not played with? There must be a trick in this. Bucky glanced at Cosine, who was bare-chested at this time. Bucky, F***ck. I have the art of seduction. Can't I just ask him directly? Bucky abruptly slapped his head. Then, with an evil smile, he walked up to Cosine. But just as he was about to ask, the back of his neck was suddenly hit hard, and he fell to the ground without saying a word.